You don't live here. Get on the ground. Get on the ground now. The flashlight hit Marcus Ellery's face like a slap. White heat across his retinas, turning the world into nothing but glare and the silhouette of a man with a holstered weapon and the absolute certainty of someone who had already decided the ending before the story began. The officer had crossed the lawn in 4 strides, no questions, no identification request, no dispatch confirmation. He grabbed a fistful of Marcus's jacket collar and yanked downward, hard enough that Marcus's knees buckled against the porch steps, hard enough that his carry-on suitcase toppled sideways and cracked open on the concrete walkway, spilling a charger cable, a toiletry bag, and a folded gray suit jacket onto the wet grass of his own front yard. But 4 cameras were already recording, and the woman driving toward that house at 80 miles an hour had spent the last 6 years making sure the whole world could watch when moments like this happen. That part, the officer didn't know yet. What he knew was this: 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night in July, a black man standing at the front door of a house in Bellhaven Estates, pulling at the handle, and a 911 call that gave him all the permission he needed. What he didn't know was that the smart lock had been installed 9 days ago, and the code had reset during a firmware update while the homeowner was on a 4-day trip, and that the man on the ground in front of him owned every square foot of the property the officer was now standing on. The 911 call had come in 4 minutes earlier. The recording would later be entered into evidence, transcribed, and read back in a room where the woman who made it would have to hear her own voice played for strangers. Fulton County 911, what's your emergency? There's a strange man, trying to break into the house across the street, 412 Bellhaven Lane. He's been standing at the door for several minutes, pulling at the handle. He does not look like he belongs here. The dispatcher asked for a description. The caller, a woman older, her voice thin with the particular urgency of someone who had already composed the narrative before dialing, said, tall, dark clothing, baseball cap. She didn't say black. She didn't need to. The zip code, the neighborhood, the hour, and the phrase "does not look like he belongs" carried enough freight for any dispatcher who'd worked the Fulton County Board longer than a week. 3 patrol cars were available within a 6-mile radius. 1 responded. Officer Gage Pruitt, 4 years on the force, 11 complaints in his personnel file that had been methodically reclassified or expunged, and a response time tonight that would later raise questions in an internal affairs review. 2 minutes and 41 seconds from dispatch to arrival. Fast. Unusually fast for a suspicious person call in a neighborhood where the crime rate was lower than the national average for jaywalking. Inside the house, behind the door Marcus couldn't open, the Ring security system registered motion on the front porch camera. The LED blinked red once, recording initiated, and pushed a notification through the cloud to every paired device on the account. One of those devices sat in the cup holder of a silver Honda Civic, currently northbound on Interstate 85. 14 minutes away. The screen lit up. Front door and motion detected. 11:47 p.m. Maya Vance glanced down. Then she looked again. The thumbnail showed blue and red lights sweeping across a familiar front porch. A man, face down, on the lawn. She pressed the accelerator until the speedometer needle trembled past 80. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what this officer does next is going to cost him everything he thought he had. 3 weeks earlier, the moving truck had arrived at 412 Bellhaven Lane on a Tuesday morning in early July, just after 8 a.m. The driver double-checked the address twice, not because of the GPS, because of the neighborhood. Bellhaven Estates sat behind a low stone wall and a wrought iron gate that opened with a code residents received upon closing. 92 homes on curving streets, shaded by water oaks older than anyone living under them. Median household income, $240,000. Median skin tone, the kind that never triggered a 911 call. Marcus Ellery had bought the house, a 4-bedroom Georgian colonial that the previous owners, the Morrisons, had listed after relocating to Savannah, through a real estate agent who handled the entire transaction by email, phone, and DocuSign. Nobody in Bellhaven Estates had met the new owner before the truck pulled up. Nobody had been given a reason to. Real estate transactions don't come with introductions. They come with closing documents, title insurance, and a set of keys, Or, in Marcus's case, a digital smart lock code that arrived by email the same day the deed was recorded at the Fulton County Clerk's office. The moving crew, 3 men in gray t-shirts with a company logo Marcus had found through Georgetown alumni recommendations, unloaded boxes with efficiency, bed frame first, bookshelves, a desk that took 2 men and a furniture dolly to navigate through the front door, then boxes, labeled in Marcus's handwriting, study, reference, kitchen, essentials, bedroom, do not stack. Vivian Hargrove noticed the truck at 8:14 a.m. She was walking her golden doodle, a $2,000 dog named Clementine, along the sidewalk across the street when she paused, adjusted her sunglasses, and watched the movers carry a box labeled study. Reference up the front steps. She didn't cross the street. She didn't wave. She took her phone from her cardigan pocket, turned away from the truck, and called someone. Did you know someone bought the Morrison place? A pause. No, I didn't see who. The movers are there now. I'll find out. She didn't find out. She didn't try mum. She turned the corner with Clementine, finished her loop, and went home where she opened the Bellhaven Estates HOA group chat, a private thread with 43 members and an average of 6 messages per day about garbage schedules, holiday decorations, and which landscaping company was offering spring discounts, and typed, FYI, new owner at 412, moving truck there now. Anyone have details? Nobody did. The thread went quiet, but the question had been planted, and in a neighborhood where everyone knew every car, every day, every jogging route, the absence of information about the new resident at 412 Bellhaven Lane was itself a kind of information. It meant the new person was unknown, and in Bellhaven, unknown was a category that carried weight. The next day, Wednesday, a letter appeared in Marcus's mailbox, hand-delivered, not mailed. The envelope bore the Bellhaven Estates HOA logo, a stylized oak tree inside a shield, and contained a 14-page welcome packet that Marcus opened while standing at his kitchen counter eating leftover takeout from the night before. The packet covered everything: trash collection schedules, Tuesday and Friday, noise ordinances, quiet hours after 10 p.m., approved exterior paint colors, 18 shades of white, beige, and gray, and a list of regulations that Marcus skimmed with the careful patience of someone who read dense documents for a living. One section was highlighted in red, not printed in red, but physically highlighted with a fluorescent marker by whoever had assembled the packet. All residents must register vehicles with HOA within 72 hours of occupancy. Unregistered vehicles may be reported to local authorities as potentially unauthorized. Marcus drove a Lexus ES 350, black, current model year, purchased outright 7 months earlier. He hadn't registered it with the HOA because he'd owned the house for 6 days and had spent 4 of them in another city. The highlighted section read less like a welcome and more like a warning. He set the packet on the counter, finished his food, and went back to unpacking. The bookshelves took most of Wednesday. Marcus arranged them methodically, not alphabetically, but by subject. Constitutional law on the top shelf, federal procedure below it, criminal statutes on the third shelf, civil rights case law on the fourth. Separated by small brass bookends he'd had since law school. Spines aligned flush with the shelf edge, not a single volume protruding more than a quarter inch beyond its neighbor. The closet in the master bedroom received similar treatment. Suits on the left, charcoal, navy, black, organized by season weight. Dress shirts in the center, grouped by color. Ties on a rotating rack, arranged by width. In the corner, a carry-on suitcase sat already packed. One gray suit jacket folded in tissue paper, a navy tie, a white dress shirt, toiletries, a phone charger. Ready. Always ready, he checked the front door lock before going to bed, tested the code, checked it again. Not because he was afraid, because the act of checking was a reflex, the kind that forms when your profession requires you to verify facts twice before trusting them once, when the difference between right and almost right can change a lot. On Thursday, 2 days after moving in, someone knocked on the front door at 9:15 a.m. Anna Prescott stood on the porch holding a foil-covered dish. She was 68 years old, white-haired, slender in the way of women who had stopped eating full meals after their husbands died and never started again. She wore a blue cotton blouse and khaki pants pressed so sharply the creases could cut paper. She'd lived at 416 Bellhaven Lane, directly across the street from 4 and 12, for 31 years. Her husband, Gerald, had died of pancreatic cancer in 2019. She'd stayed because the house was paid off, the neighbors knew her name, and leaving would have meant admitting that the life she'd built here had ended with Gerald's last breath. Anna Prescott knew every face on Bellhaven Lane. She knew which families had children, which had bone, which kept their Christmas lights up past January 15th, a violation of HOA Guideline 7.3. She considered herself the informal eyes of the street. Not nosy, she would say, but attentive, careful. The kind of careful that notices when a package sits on a porch for too long, when an unfamiliar car parks overnight, when a man she's never seen before opens the door of a house that until last week belonged to the Morrisons. Marcus opened the door. Anna's eyes traveled, quickly, involuntarily, with the precision of someone cataloging details. From his shoes, clean white sneakers, to his shorts, gray athletic, to his t-shirt, plain black no logo, to his face, dark skin, close-cropped hair, the faint shadow of fatigue under his eyes from 2 nights of sleeping in an unfurnished house on an air mattress. "Welcome to the neighborhood." She held out the dish. "I'm Anna, 416, just across the street. I made a chicken casserole. Gerald's recipe, God rest him." "Thank you, I'm Marcus." He took the dish. She didn't leave. "So, are you renting, or?" The question hung between them like a door neither of them wanted to open. Marcus looked at the woman standing on the porch of the house he owned, the house whose deed bore his name, whose mortgage he'd paid in full at closing, whose property taxes he'd already set up on automatic payment, and understood that the question wasn't really about renting. "I own it." "Oh." Anna Prescott smiled. It was the kind of smile that arrives a half-second too late to be spontaneous, the product of a brain recalculating a social equation in real time. "Well, that's lovely. Welcome, Marcus. If you need anything at all, I'm right across the street." She left the casserole. She left quickly. And when she crossed the street back to 416, she pulled out her phone and typed something, quickly, with her thumb, before going inside. Marcus closed the door. He set the casserole on the counter next to the HOA packet, with its red highlighted vehicle registration warning. He looked at both for a long moment, then he went back to unpacking his bookshelves. The following Saturday, Vance came for dinner. Maya and Marcus had been friends since their first week at Georgetown, assigned to the same study group in constitutional law, surviving 3 semesters of Professor Whitfield's Socratic interrogation method by quizzing each other in the library until midnight. After graduation, their paths had diverged in direction, but not in loyalty. Marcus toward the bench, Maya toward the barricades. She'd spent 6 years at the Southern Legal Defense Fund in Atlanta, specializing in police accountability cases, the kind of work that required equal parts legal precision and emotional armor. She arrived at 7 p.m. in a silver Honda Civic with 2 bags of Thai food and a box from Home Depot. "What's in the box?" Marcus asked from the front door. "Your security system." Maya set the bags on the kitchen counter and opened the Home Depot box, pulling out 4 Ring cameras, a doorbell unit, and a tangle of mounting brackets. 4 corners, 2 doors, 1 garage. Everything streams to cloud storage and pushes notifications to your phone. And to mine, because I'm your emergency contact and I don't trust the response time in this zip code. Marcus looked at the hardware spread across his counter. "You think I need surveillance cameras in a gated community with a crime rate lower than a retirement home?" Maya pulled a camera from its packaging, held it up, and looked at him with the expression she reserved for moments when she knew something he hadn't learned yet, or had learned and chosen to forget. "In a neighborhood like this, cameras aren't for catching thieves," she paused. "They're for catching narratives." They installed the system after dinner. Maya on a stepladder, Marcus handing her screws. 4 exterior cameras, front porch, side yard, back patio, garage, plus the doorbell unit, all connected to Marcus's Wi-Fi, all streaming to Ring's cloud servers with 30-day storage, all pushing motion alerts to 2 phones, Marcus's and Maya's. "If anything triggers between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., I'll get an alert." Maya tested the app on her phone, watching the 4-quadrant live feed. I'm not saying something will happen. I'm saying if it does, there'll be a record that nobody can edit. Marcus watched her drive away that night from the front porch. The cameras were mounted. The LEDs glowed faintly in the dark, red pinpoints at each corner of the house, like sentries standing watch over a territory that didn't yet feel like home. 3 weeks of uneventful nights. Marcus settled into a routine that the neighbors noticed without acknowledging. He left the house at 7:45 a.m. in a dark suit, returned between 6 and 7 p.m. and carried a leather briefcase that looked expensive because it was. He drove the Lexus. He mowed his own lawn on Saturday mornings, not because he couldn't afford a service, but because the physical repetition cleared his head in ways that sitting behind a desk never did. He registered the car with the HOA on day 3, a week and a half before the 72-hour deadline that someone had taken the trouble to highlight in red. On day 5, he came home from his first full day at the new office to find a note tucked under his windshield wiper. Not a ticket. HOA didn't have ticketing authority. A note, handwritten on Bellhaven Estates stationery. Friendly reminder, all vehicles must display HOA registration sticker on rear windshield. Stickers available from the HOA office, MF95. Thank you for your cooperation. The registration sticker had been mailed the day before. It was sitting in his mailbox, which he hadn't checked because he'd been at work since 7 a.m. The note had been placed on his car at some point during the afternoon, meaning someone had walked to his driveway, looked at his windshield, confirmed the sticker wasn't there, written a note, and placed it. On day 5, Marcus peeled the note from the windshield, read it, folded it, put it in the same drawer where he'd placed the welcome packet with its red highlighting. The drawer was becoming a pianist file. Not deliberately, but inevitably. Nobody welcomed him after Anna, no invitations to neighborhood barbecues, no knocks on the door from families introducing their children. The HOA group chat, which Marcus didn't know existed, contained 26 messages about the new owner at 412 in its first 2 weeks, none of which included his name because nobody had asked for it. Vivian Hargrove, who was HOA president, had access to the property transfer records at the county clerk's office, knew his name. She hadn't shared it. That omission was deliberate and precise, a social weapon wielded with the elegance of a woman who understood that withholding information was a form of power, and that a name humanized a stranger in ways that made him harder to treat as a threat. Then Thursday night arrived. The flight from Washington, D.C. had been delayed 4 hours. Mechanical issue, then a gate change, then a ground hold that stretched past 9 p.m. before the plane finally pushed back. Marcus landed at Hartsfield-Jackson at 11:20 p.m., retrieved his car from the long-term lot, and drove north on Interstate 85 with the windows down and NPR on low, too tired for music, too wired from the trip to sit in silence. He pulled into the Bellhaven Estates gate at 11:39 p.m., punched the community code. The gate opened, he drove the curving streets to 412, parked in the driveway, and pulled his carry-on from the trunk. The porch light was on, timer controlled. The front door was locked. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket for his phone to pull up the smart lock app, entered the 6-digit code, and nothing. The lock didn't respond. He tried again. Error message. Code reset. Please update via app. He stood on his own porch in the dark at 11:44 p.m., pressing buttons on a lock that his own firmware had betrayed, while his suitcase leaned against his leg and the cicadas screamed their indifferent summer song from the water oaks above. Across the street, a curtain moved. Anna Prescott had been in bed since 10:15 p.m. She was not asleep. She hadn't slept well since Gerald died, and the Ambien prescription she'd once relied on had been replaced by a routine of herbal tea and late-night television that left her in a shallow, breakable doze. The sound of a car door closing had pulled her to the window. Not loud, just different from the usual nighttime sounds of Bellhaven Lane. She saw a figure on the porch of Ford Bay, male, tall, dark clothing, a suitcase, pulling at the door handle. The porch light caught his face for a moment, but Anna wasn't close enough to see features clearly, and the distance between her window and the porch of 412V was 63 feet, which was far enough that a familiar face became an unfamiliar shape. She didn't recognize him. Or rather, she didn't connect the man on the porch with the man she'd brought a casserole to 3 weeks ago. The baseball cap he hadn't been wearing then, the dark jacket he hadn't been wearing then, the hour which transformed a neighbor into a stranger with the simple arithmetic of shadow and suspicion. She picked up her phone from the nightstand, hesitated for 11 seconds. The 911 log would later confirm the call was placed at 11:43 p.m., 3 minutes before Pruitt's lights would paint the front of 412 in blue and red. In those 11 seconds, Anna Prescott could have walked to her own front door, opened it, and called across the street, "Marcus, is that you? Everything okay?" She didn't. She dialed 911. "Step away from the door. Hands. Let me see your hands." Pruitt's voice carried the particular flatness of a man who believed he was in control and wanted everyone within earshot to know it. He stood 12 feet from the porch, feet planted wide, one hand on the flashlight, the other on his belt. Not on his weapon, not yet, but close enough that the gesture communicated its own message. Marcus turned slowly. The flashlight beam found his face and held it there. A white circle of interrogation that made his eyes water and reduced the officer behind it to a voice and a silhouette. "I live here." Marcus's voice was steady, controlled. The voice of a man who understood that volume and agitation were luxuries he couldn't afford in this particular moment, on this particular lawn, facing this particular uniform. "This is my house. My name is Marcus Ellery. My ID is in my wallet, back left pocket. Don't reach for anything." Pruitt's flashlight didn't move. His free hand hadn't moved either, still resting on the belt, fingers splayed near the holster. "Step down from the porch. Come toward me." Slowly. Marcus stepped down. 3 steps, porch to walkway to grass. His shoes sank into the damp lawn. Behind him, his suitcase lay open where it had fallen, the gray suit jacket visible against the dark ground like a flag nobody was looking at. "Turn around." Marcus turned, slowly. Every movement telegraphed, deliberate. The physical vocabulary of a man who had learned, not from training, but from living, that sudden gestures near police officers carried consequences measured in calibers. Pruitt closed the distance in 2 steps. He was 5'11", 210 pounds, built like someone who spent his off days in a gym and his on days looking for reasons to prove it mattered. He grabbed Marcus's left wrist, not firmly, not gently, but with the proprietary grip of someone handling property rather than a person, and wrenched it behind Marcus's back. "My ID is in my wallet." Marcus said it again, because the first time hadn't been acknowledged, and the second time might not be either. But the words existed now in whatever recording devices were capturing this moment, and that was their purpose: to exist, and to be undeniable later, even if they were useless now. "Back left pocket, check it, you'll see this address." Pruitt's other hand found Marcus's right wrist. Pulled it back. Marcus's shoulder joint stretched to the edge of its range, a white line of pain that shot from rotator cuff to collarbone, and Pruitt wrenched both wrists together behind Marcus's back. The handcuffs went on, metal on skin, click, 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 ratchets tightening past snug, past secure, into the territory where steel becomes a statement. Marcus's knees hit the grass, not because he lowered himself, because Pruitt pushed. A downward shove between the shoulder blades, palm flat, force enough to buckle a man's legs. Marcus went down face first, turning his head at the last instant so his cheek hit the wet lawn instead of his nose. Grass against skin, the smell of dirt and fertilizer, and the particular metallic tang of sprinkler water that had been sitting in copper pipes. Pruitt's knee came down on Marcus's lower back. Not necessary. Marcus wasn't moving, wasn't resisting, wasn't doing anything except lying on his own lawn, with his face in his own grass while his own sprinkler system's moisture soaked into his shirt. But the knee came down anyway. Weight, authority, the physical declaration that this body was now under control and that the man controlling it had earned, by badge and by gun, and by the 911 call that gave him permission, the right to press another human being into the earth. The cuffs were tighter than they needed to be. Marcus could feel this metal edge cutting into the thin skin over his wrist bones. Not breaking skin, not yet, but pressing hard enough that the marks would still be visible in photographs taken by an IA investigator 6 days later. He flexed his fingers once to check circulation. Pins and needles already. The cuffs were too tight, and Pruitt either didn't know or didn't care. 7 seconds in training cuffs during a legal clinic in 2014 had been enough to understand the mechanics. This time, the seconds would multiply into minutes, into a number that would later be printed in bold in a federal complaint and read aloud in a hearing room where the officers who put them on would have to listen. Pruitt reached into Marcus's back left pocket and pulled out the wallet. Brown leather, worn soft at the fold. He flipped it open, driver's license visible in the clear window, the address printed in small font beneath the photo, 412 Bellhaven Lane, Atlanta, GA 30327. Pruitt looked at it. He looked at Marcus. He closed the wallet, slid it into his own vest pocket, and said nothing. "You're looking at my identification." Marcus's voice hadn't changed. Same pitch, same control. But the sentence wasn't a plea. It was a notation. A timestamp entered into a record that existed in Marcus's mind with the precision of a court transcript. "You're holding my Georgia driver's license, which lists this address. You have the information needed to verify my residency, and you are choosing not to. Anyone can carry a fake ID." Pruitt's flashlight swept the porch, the door, the fallen suitcase, cataloging the scene not for evidence but for narrative, building a story that justified what he'd already done. "I'm securing the scene until we figure out what's going on here. I'd like your name and badge number, please." Pruitt didn't answer. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Not a push, but a downward pressure that communicated its intention without words. And Marcus went to his knees on the wet grass of his own front lawn. The ground was soft from afternoon rain. The moisture soaked through his trousers in seconds. Behind him, the open suitcase lay on the walkway, the gray suit jacket absorbing dew like a sponge. Pruitt keyed his shoulder radio. "Unit 47 on scene at 412 Bellhaven Lane. One individual detained. Possibles 10:15, awaiting verification." The dispatch log would later show the following timeline, reconstructed by Internal Affairs, and entered into the case file as Exhibit 3, 2349. Officer Pruitt arrives at 412 Bellhaven Lane, 2351. Pruitt issues verbal commands. No dispatch contact for property verification, 2352. Subject handcuffed. Pruitt secures wallet containing Georgia DL matching property address, 2353. Pruitt radios dispatch. One individual detained, 007. 18 minutes later, Sergeant Calder contacts dispatch to verify property ownership, 0009. Dispatch confirms property at 412 Bellhaven Lane registered to Ellery Marcus. Marcus D. No outstanding warrants, no stolen property reports. 18 minutes. Marcus would spend 18 minutes handcuffed on the ground before anyone in uniform bothered to check whether the man they were holding was the owner of the house they were holding him in front of. "I want to be clear." Marcus spoke from his knees, voice level, eyes forward. "I am not resisting. I am complying with your instructions. But I am also noting that you have not followed standard verification procedure. I will be filing a formal report." The words landed differently than Pruitt expected. Not louder, quieter, and not angry, precise. The kind of precision that belongs to someone who uses words like procedure and report, not as threats, but as tools, daily tools. The way a carpenter uses a level or a surgeon uses a scalpel. Pruitt didn't notice, not consciously, but something in his posture shifted. A half step back, a slight repositioning of his weight, as though his body had registered something his brain hadn't processed yet. 14 minutes away, Maya Vance's phone was still glowing in the cup holder of her Honda Civic. She'd opened the Ring app at 11:48 p.m. and watched, for 11 seconds that felt like 11 minutes. The live feed from Camera 1 front porch, Marcus on his knees, an officer standing over him, bless him in red lights painting the house in alternating shame. She did 3 things in rapid succession. First, she called 911. "I'm calling to confirm the nature of the call at 412 Bellhaven Lane, Fulton County." Her voice was calm, professional. The voice of someone who had made calls like this before and knew that tone mattered more than volume when speaking to dispatchers. I'm an attorney. The owner of that property is Marcus Ellery. I can verify his identity. I am en route now. The dispatcher paused. Then, ma'am, officers are already on scene. They'll handle verification. They haven't. Maya checked the live feed again. Marcus was still on his knees. I'm 14 minutes out. Please log this call. Second, she opened her phone's camera and hit record, a backup of the backup, because redundancy was the religion of anyone who'd ever watched footage disappear from a server. Third, she pressed the accelerator. The speedometer climbed past 80, past 85. The Honda Civic wasn't built for this kind of urgency, but it would get there. It had to. On the live feed, the camera caught something Maya wouldn't process until later. Pruitt grabbing Marcus's suitcase from the walkway and throwing it, not setting it, not moving it, throwing it, across the lawn, where it tumbled twice and came to rest against the base of a magnolia tree, 15 feet from where Marcus knelt. The gray suit jacket slid out onto the grass. The navy tie followed. Both lay there in the wet dark like shed skin. And across the street, at 416 Bellhaven Lane, Anna Prescott stood behind her curtain and watched the man she'd brought a casserole to 3 weeks ago, kneeling on his own front lawn in handcuffs. The light from her phone screen cast a pale blue glow across her face, still lit from the 911 call she'd made 4 minutes ago, the call that had started all of this. She didn't go outside. She didn't turn off the light. She stood there watching and felt something settle in her chest. Heavy, unnamed, and shaped exactly like the distance between what she'd done and what she should have done instead. The first neighbor appeared at 11:56 p.m. Craig Boatwright, 408 Bellhaven Lane. 2 houses east, retired financial advisor, 63 years old, member of the HOA Architectural Review Committee, opened his front door in a bathrobe and slippers. He stood on his porch with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had been disturbed from something important and wanted the source of the disturbance to know it. He didn't call out to Marcus. He didn't ask what was happening. He watched. And when Pruitt's flashlight swept in his direction, Craig Boatwright gave the officer a nod, small, instinctive, the kind of acknowledgement that one authority figure extends to another. By now, Pruitt had begun what he would later describe in his report as securing the scene, a phrase that covered a range of actions, most of which had nothing to do with security. He walked to the suitcase lying against the magnolia tree and kicked it. Not a tap, a full contact strike with the toe of his boot that sent the case tumbling another 4 feet across the grass. The toiletry bag burst open. A toothbrush, a razor, a bottle of cologne rolled across the wet lawn like scattered evidence of a life that Pruitt had already decided didn't belong here. The gray suit jacket, the one Marcus had folded in tissue paper, the one he wore to work on days that mattered, lay crumpled in the grass. Pruitt stepped on it as he walked back toward Marcus. Not around it, on it. The boot print would still be visible when Marcus retrieved it the next morning. A muddy oval pressed into the left lapel, permanent, a souvenir of the night the law came to his door and found him guilty of arriving home. Marcus watched from the ground. His jaw tightened. One muscle, left side, the only visible reaction to watching a man in uniform grind the heel of his boot into a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But it wasn't the money. It was the gesture, the casual destruction. The message embedded in the boot print: your things are my evidence. Your property is my scene. Your dignity is something I can step on because the badge says I can. He said nothing. He filed it. The second neighbor appeared at 11:58 p.m., then a third, then 2 more. They didn't come as a group. They emerged individually, from doorways, from porches, from second-floor windows, where bedroom lights flicked on one by one like a slow cascade of awakening suspicion. Within 10 minutes of Pruitt's arrival, 6 residents of Bellhaven Lane were outside or visible at windows, all watching the same scene. A black man on his knees on a wet lawn, a white officer standing over him, and a suitcase lying against a magnolia tree like abandoned evidence. None of them asked Marcus if he was all right. All of them asked Pruitt, "Everything okay, officer? Is there a problem? Do you need us to call anyone?" The questions were directed at the uniform, not at the man on the ground. In the social calculus of Bellhaven Estates, the badge was the authority, the handcuffs were the proof, and the man between them was a variable that had already been solved. Vivian Hargrove arrived at 12:02 a.m. Not from her house. She lived 4 streets over on Bellhaven Circle, but from her car, a white Mercedes GLE that she parked at the curb with the engine still running. She wore a silk robe over yoga pants, and her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she'd been in bed, but had gotten up with purpose. She held her phone in one hand and a travel mug of something in the other. She didn't approach Marcus. She approached Pruitt. "Officer, I'm Vivian Hargrove, president of the Bellhaven Estates HOA. She extended a hand. Pruitt didn't shake it. His hands were occupied, but the gesture established what it was meant to establish. Authority recognizing authority. "We've had concerns about this property since the new owner moved in. There have been unfamiliar vehicles, packages delivered at odd hours. The HOA has a duty to protect property values and resident safety." Every word was technically accurate. Vehicles had come and gone. Movers, a furniture delivery, Maya's Honda Civic. Packages had arrived. From Amazon, from a legal bookstore, from a kitchenware company Marcus had ordered from during the move. None of it was unusual. All of it was true. And the way Vivian Hargrove presented it, standing next to a uniformed officer, in front of 6 watching neighbors, while the homeowner knelt in handcuffs, transformed ordinary into suspicious with the alchemy of context. She moved between the clusters of watching neighbors with the fluid confidence of a woman who had chaired meetings, organized fundraisers, and controlled social landscapes for 2 decades. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm not saying anything is wrong." She said it to Craig Boatwright, loud enough for the others to hear. "I'm just saying we need to be vigilant. Property values in Bellhaven have increased 14% in 3 years. That doesn't happen by accident." Craig Boatwright nodded. A woman in a fleece jacket, 410 Bellhaven, Karen something, nodded. The nodding spread like a quiet contagion. Marcus from the ground watched the nodding. He'd been on his knees for 13 minutes. The moisture had soaked through his trousers to his skin. His wrists ached where the cuffs bit into the tendons. And around him, a circle of neighbors he'd never met was constructing, in real time, the social architecture of his exclusion, not with fists or slurs, but with nods and property values in the phrase, "We need to be vigilant," which meant the same thing it had always meant in neighborhoods like this. In every decade, in every zip code where the welcome mat had a footnote. Headlights appeared at the end of the block. Another patrol car, marked not Pruitt's. It pulled to the curb behind Pruitt's vehicle, and a man stepped out with the unhurried gait of someone who had been doing this job long enough to know that urgency was for rookies and control was for sergeants. Sergeant Nolan Calder, 14 years on the force. Shift supervisor for the Northwest District. He wore his authority the way some men wear expensive watches. Visible, deliberate, and positioned so you couldn't miss it. Pruitt met him at the curb. Their conversation was low, but not low enough. Camera 2, mounted at the side yard, captured fragments of audio that would later be enhanced by a forensic audio specialist. Suspicious individual, possible B&E, refusing to comply. Wallet? Checked it? Anyone can carry a fake. Calder listened. He didn't correct Pruitt's characterization, refusing to comply, despite the fact that Marcus had complied with every instruction, had not resisted, had not raised his voice, had not made a single gesture that could be interpreted as aggressive by any standard other than the one Pruitt was applying. Instead, Calder added his own layer. He walked to Marcus, stood over him, looked down with the appraising expression of a man evaluating merchandise. The caller reported attempted forced entry. Calder's voice was louder than necessary, pitched for the neighbors, for the record, for the narrative he was building on top of the one Pruitt had started. Under Georgia Code 16721, we have reasonable suspicion to secure the premises and verify occupancy. Sir, do you have a deed to this property on your person right now? The question was a trap, and both men knew it. Georgia Code Section 16721 defines criminal trespass, but it requires the element of without authority, and typically demands that the property owner or their agent ask the person to leave before trespass attaches. Nobody had asked Marcus to leave. Nobody could because Marcus was the property owner. And the suggestion that a man should carry a deed at midnight as proof of his right to exist in his own house was the kind of legal absurdity that only works when the man being asked is too scared or too uninformed to recognize it. Marcus was neither. The deed is inside my house. His voice came from ground level, looking up at Calder, wrists behind his back, knees in the wet grass. But the voice itself was level, precise, and stripped of any emotion that could be used against him. The house you are preventing me from entering. My driver's license matches this address. Officer Pruitt took my wallet and has not checked it. Calder looked at Pruitt. Pruitt shrugged, a gesture so casual, so indifferent to the fact that a man's identification sat unopened in his vest pocket, that the shrug itself would later become the centerpiece of Maya Vance's opening argument in the civil complaint. Calder didn't check the wallet either. Instead, he began walking the perimeter of the house, peering into windows, testing the side gate, examining the garage door, scribbling in a pocket notebook. He had no warrant. He had no probable cause for a search. The 911 call had been classified by dispatch as suspicious person, not burglary in progress, not breaking and entering, not anything that would justify a premises sweep without the homeowner's consent or a magistrate's signature. But Calder wasn't looking for evidence. He was looking for time. Every minute he spent circling the house, writing notes, creating the visual impression of an active investigation, was another minute Marcus spent on the ground, and another minute the narrative had to solidify. By the time anyone reviewed the footage, the sheer duration of the investigation would imply that there had been something worth investigating. Pruitt stood over Marcus while Calder circled. He hadn't spoken since Calder's arrival. Didn't need to. The sergeant's presence had elevated the encounter from a traffic stop level detention to something that felt institutional, official, endorsed by rank. Marcus watched Calder's flashlight move along the side of his house, and felt the particular fury that comes from watching someone treat your property as a crime scene while you kneel in your own yard in handcuffs. He controlled it, swallowed it, filed it in the place where fury became evidence and evidence became leverage. On the sidewalk, Vivian Hargrove watched Calder's perimeter walk and turned to the nearest cluster of neighbors. "See," she said quietly, "they're doing a thorough check. That's all we want, thoroughness." Nobody answered, but in the dark, heads nodded. A man from 414, 2 lots east, a recently divorced software engineer named Todd Meacham, who had moved to Bellhaven 3 years ago and had never once questioned why the neighborhood looked the way it looked, stepped off his porch and crossed the lawn toward the cluster near the sidewalk. He was wearing gym shorts and no shirt, and the 2 beers he'd had before bed gave his movements a looseness that his daytime self would have edited. He stopped 10 feet from where Marcus lay. "Hey." He pointed at Marcus with a beer bottle he'd carried outside without realizing it. "Did you try to break into that house?" Marcus lifted his head. "I own that house." "Yeah, right." Todd Meacham took a step closer. "Then why are you in handcuffs? Police don't just cuff people for no reason." "I'd invite you to watch the footage and form your own conclusion." "Footage?" Todd looked around, noticed the cameras for the first time, the red LEDs blinking at each corner, and his face shifted from belligerent certainty to something less defined. But the beer and the audience and the narrative Vivian had been assembling kept him moving forward. He stepped closer, close enough that Pruitt, who should have intervened, simply watched, and pointed the bottle at Marcus's face. "You people show up and expect—" "Sir," Maya's voice cut across the lawn. She'd moved along the sidewalk, phone held steady, livestream capturing everything. "I'd strongly recommend you step away from Mr. Ellery and return to your property. You're approaching a man who is handcuffed and unable to defend himself. If you make physical contact, that's assault, and approximately 30,000 people are watching you consider it right now." Todd Meacham looked at Maya, looked at the phone, looked at the number on the screen, 30,000, give or take, and the beer-fueled confidence drained from his posture like water from a cracked glass. He stepped back. 1 step, 2. Then he turned and walked back to his porch without another word, setting the bottle on the railing with a clink that camera 2 recorded at 12:09 a.m. Vivian watched the exchange from the curb. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers moved on her phone, typing rapidly into the HOA group chat. What she typed would later be entered into evidence as part of a pattern of community coordination. Everyone just stay calm and let the officers work. This is exactly why we pay HOA dues. Security, vigilance, standards. No one is saying anything is wrong. We're just being responsible neighbors. The word standards did the work that Vivian needed it to do. In Bellhaven Estates, standards was a word that meant property values and landscaping regulations and approved exterior paint colors, but it also meant something else, something older, something that lived in the space between the word and the silence that followed it. And everyone who read it understood both meanings, whether they admitted it or not. This story is just getting started, and the moment you hear what happens when Marcus's friend shows up, you'll understand why this video is breaking the internet. Keep watching. The time was 12:08 a.m. Marcus had been handcuffed for 16 minutes. Dispatch had not been contacted. His wallet sat in Pruitt's vest pocket unopened. And at the end of Bellhaven Lane, a pair of headlights turned in through the gate, moving fast. Vance had arrived. She parked the Honda Civic at the curb, not behind the patrol cars, but across the street, in front of Anna Prescott's house, where the angle gave her a clear sightline to the entire front yard of 412. She didn't rush out of the car. She sat for 4 seconds, watching the scene through the windshield with the practiced stillness of someone who had trained herself to observe before acting. Because in her line of work, the first thing you said to a police officer determined everything that came after. 4 seconds. Marcus on his knees. Pruitt standing over him. Calder returning from his perimeter walk. 6 neighbors on porches and lawns. Vivian Hargrove at the curb with her travel mug and her Mercedes still running. Maya opened the Ring app on her phone. 4 camera feeds. Front porch, side yard, back patio, garage, all recording, all streaming to cloud storage. She tapped camera 1. Front porch, leads, clear, audio active. Then she did the thing that would change everything. She tapped the Share Live button, selected her social media account, a professional page with 1,800 followers, mostly civil rights attorneys, legal journalists, and community organizers from the Southern Legal Defense Fund Network. Added a caption, "Live from 412 Bellhaven Lane, homeowner detained on his own property. Officers have not verified ID watch," and pressed go live. The stream started, 12 viewers, then 20. Then, as the first shares propagated through networks of people who had seen footage like this before and knew what it meant, 47, 91, 160. Maya stepped out of the car. She wore a black blazer over a gray t-shirt, the blazer she kept in the back seat for exactly these occasions, because presentation was armor and armor was necessary. She carried her phone in her left hand, screen facing outward, the live stream running. Her right hand held nothing, empty, visible, deliberate. She crossed the street in a straight line, heels clicking on asphalt, and stopped on the sidewalk. Public property, not Pruitt's jurisdiction, not Calder's authority. 12 feet from where Marcus knelt. Officers, her voice carried. Not shouting, projecting, the way trial attorneys project when they want a jury to hear every syllable without feeling like they're being yelled at. "My name is Maya Vance. I'm an attorney. Mr. Ellery is the legal owner of this property. I can confirm his identity and provide documentation if needed." Pruitt turned. The flashlight found her face. She didn't flinch. "You are currently detaining a man on his own front lawn without probable cause." Maya's eyes didn't leave Pruitt's. Under the Fourth Amendment, this detention requires reasonable suspicion of a specific crime, not a neighbor's phone call based on his appearance. "Ma'am, step back." Pruitt's voice had changed, not softer but tighter, the way a rope changes when weight is added. "This is an active scene. I'm standing on a public sidewalk, which is my legal right under the First Amendment. I'm also informing you that this interaction is being recorded by the homeowner's security system." Maya raised her phone slightly, not pointing it at Pruitt, just making it visible. "Everything you do and say from this point forward is being documented." Pruitt's eyes moved. For the first time since Marcus had been on the ground, his attention shifted from the man he was detaining to something else. He looked up, scanned the front of the house, and saw them. 4 small red LEDs, one at each corner of the house. Porch, side yard, back patio, garage. Ring cameras, mounted, active, blinking. He didn't know they were streaming live. He didn't know that the viewer count had just passed 400 and was climbing. He knew only that he was being recorded, and the knowledge didn't make him careful. It made him angry. Turn those cameras off. The command was reflexive, absurd, and legally baseless, which Maya knew and which Pruitt either didn't know or didn't care about. This is a police investigation. Residents have a legal right to operate security cameras on their own property. Maya didn't move, didn't raise her voice, didn't blink. And I'd recommend that you focus on verifying Mr. Ellery's identification, which has been in your possession for the past 12 minutes, in which you have not examined. Pruitt's jaw tightened. His hand, the one that had been resting near his belt, moved upward, and for a moment that lasted longer in Maya's perception than it did in real time. She thought he was reaching for something, but his hand went to his shoulder radio instead. Dispatch, Unit 47, requesting additional unit at Bellhaven Lane. We have a civilian interfering with an active scene. I am not interfering, Maya's voice cut through the radio chatter. I am standing on a public sidewalk, observing and documenting a detention that has lasted 16 minutes without ID verification. That is not interference, that is oversight. The viewer count hit 900. A comment appeared in the live stream chat. Why won't they just check his ID? Another, they have his wallet, they won't look at it. Winton, another, share this, everyone share this right now. They did. The link began propagating through group chats, through social media feeds, through the networks of people who stayed up late because they couldn't sleep. People who scrolled because they were bored. People who watched because they had seen this before, lived this before, feared this before, and recognized it the way you recognize a song you never wanted to hear again. 1,200 viewers. 2,000. Calder returned from behind the house. He'd circled the entire perimeter. 8 minutes of theatrical investigation that had yielded nothing, because there was nothing to yield. No broken windows, no forced entry marks. No suspicious anything except a man on his own porch with a suitcase and a smart lock that had glitched. He saw Maya. His expression didn't change, but his pace slowed. The subtle deceleration of a man recalculating. Who are you? Calder directed the question at Maya the way you direct a question at a subordinate. Not curious, but commanding. I've already identified myself to Officer Pruitt. I'm an attorney. I'm here to confirm the identity of the homeowner you're currently detaining on his own property. We'll handle verification. You haven't. Maya's phone was still held at waist level, screen facing outward. The red live indicator pulsed in the corner. It has been 18 minutes since Officer Pruitt arrived. He confiscated Mr. Ellery's wallet, examined it, and placed it in his own pocket without verifying the identification inside. That wallet contains a Georgia driver's license listing this address. I'm asking, for the record, why verification has not occurred. Calder looked at Pruitt. Something passed between them. Not words, but the silent communication of two men who understood that the situation had shifted and that the shift was not in their favor. We'll contact dispatch. Calder said it like a concession. It wasn't. It was the minimum procedural step that should have been taken 17 minutes ago. But the way he said it, the tone of reluctant generosity, was designed to make it sound like a favor. He stepped away and keyed his radio. It was 12:14 a.m. Marcus had been handcuffed for 22 minutes. And what happened next would be the reason 4 million people watched this footage in the next 48 hours. Pruitt stepped toward Maya, not casually, not professionally. He stepped toward her the way men step toward things they want to move, with his chest forward, his shoulders square, and his right hand extended palm outward in a gesture that police training manuals would call creating distance, and any civilian watching would call threatening. I said, step back. His palm connected with Maya's left shoulder. Not a punch, not a shove that would send her stumbling. A push, firm, deliberate. The heel of his hand caught the joint where collarbone meets shoulder, and the force traveled through Maya's frame like a wave, her upper body rocking backward, her feet skidding on the sidewalk concrete, her phone arms swinging wide before she caught her balance. The push wasn't hard enough to knock her down. It was hard enough to hurt, a deep, bruising impact that she would feel for 3 days. A purple oval the size of a plum that she would photograph in her bathroom mirror the next morning and enter into evidence as Exhibit 9 in a complaint she would file before noon. But in the moment, in the half-second between impact and recovery, something else happened. Maya's blazer lapel caught on Pruitt's thumb. Fabric tore. A small sound, barely audible, but camera one caught it. The rasp of stitching giving way. And the detail would later appear in forensic reports as a confirmation that the contact was forceful enough to damage clothing, which elevated the encounter from incidental touch to intentional physical interference with a civilian. Maya didn't stumble. She planted her feet, left foot forward, right foot back, the stance of someone who had been pushed before and had learned how not to fall, and held her ground. Her phone didn't drop. The live stream didn't cut. The red indicator kept pulsing. Her shoulder throbbed. She ignored it. The viewer count had already been climbing. The push detonated it. 4,700 became 6,000 in 11 seconds. 6 became 8. 8 became 10. People were sharing not just the link, but the moment. Screen recordings of the exact second Pruitt's palm met Maya's shoulder, looped, slowed, zoomed, captioned with words that ranged from legal analysis to raw fury. Did he just put his hands on her? Someone typed. Officer just assaulted a civilian attorney on a public sidewalk. From a verified account with 40K followers. Somebody call the news. From 3 different people simultaneously. I'm recording this recording. From dozens. You just made physical contact with a civilian who posed no threat on a public sidewalk while she was exercising her constitutionally protected right to observe and record. It wasn't Maya who said it. It was Marcus, from the ground, still handcuffed, still on his knees, still soaked in dew and indignity. His voice carried across the lawn, not shouting, not pleading, but stating, with the flat precision of someone reading findings into a record. Sergeant Calder. Marcus's eyes found the sergeant, who had turned from his radio at the sound of contact. You witnessed that. I'm asking you to note it. Officer Pruitt initiated unprovoked physical contact with a civilian on public property. Calder's mouth opened, closed. The radio was still in his hand. Dispatch was waiting on the other end for the property verification request he hadn't yet made. The viewer count passed 7,800. And then, in the silence that followed Marcus's words, in the space between what had happened and what everyone was deciding it meant, something shifted in the way Calder looked at Marcus. A flicker, brief, the kind of micro-expression that body language experts would later analyze in frame-by-frame breakdowns on cable news. Calder's eyebrows drawing together not in anger but in recognition. Not of Marcus's face, of Marcus's language. The syntax, the precision, the way he'd constructed that sentence. Unprovoked physical contact with a civilian on public property, with the structural discipline of a legal finding. Nobody who was scared talked like that. Nobody who was confused or panicked or guilty. Only someone for whom language of this kind was daily, natural, professional. Calder noticed the discomfort that had been building behind his professional mask deepened by one shade. He said nothing, but his hand moved away from his radio and he took one step back from where Marcus knelt. The kind of step that isn't retreat, but is no longer confidence. Headlights swept the street again. Another patrol car. Unit 19. The additional unit Pruitt had requested. It stopped at the curb and Officer Tess Whitmore stepped out with the efficiency of someone who'd been briefed en route and had already decided what role she was going to play. Whitmore was 29, 6 years on the force. Slim, sharp-featured, with the particular alertness of a person who navigated institutional power structures by knowing exactly where the cameras were and exactly when they needed to not be working. She walked to Pruitt, not to Calder, to Pruitt. She leaned close to his ear, and what she said was quiet enough that the neighbors on the porches couldn't hear it, and Calder 10 feet away couldn't hear it. But camera one, the ring camera mounted on the front porch, 8 feet above ground, with its directional microphone aimed at the walkway, captured it. Clear, clean, time-stamped. Gage, your cam. 2 words, 2 syllables each. 4 syllables total that would later appear in boldface in an internal affairs report, in italics in a federal complaint, and in quotation marks in 17 news articles across 6 states. Pruitt looked down at his chest, the body cam mounted on his vest, standard issue, required by departmental policy to be activated during all citizen encounters, was on. The green LED indicator glowed steadily. Recording. Everything. Pruitt reached up. His fingers found the power button on the side of the unit. He pressed it. The green light went dark. 12:14 a.m. Body cam video feed. Terminated. But, and this was the detail that would unravel everything, the audio continued recording. A technical characteristic of the Axum Body 3 camera system. When the video feed is manually deactivated, the internal microphone enters a buffering mode that continues to capture audio for the duration of the encounter, stored in a separate file partition that most officers don't know exists and that IT specialists can extract during forensic review. Pruitt didn't know. Whitmore didn't know. Calder didn't know. The microphone knew, and it kept listening. Whitmore, meanwhile, began her role. She walked the property, not like Calder, who had circled with the performative diligence of a man building a narrative, but like someone looking for something specific. She peered into the front windows. She tested the garage door handle. She walked around the side of the house and paused at the back gate, where she spent 45 seconds that no camera directly covered. A blind spot between camera 2, side yard, and camera 3, back patio, that she either found by accident or knew about in advance. When she returned from the blind spot, she walked directly toward Maya, not toward Pruitt, not toward Calder, toward the woman holding the phone. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification." Whitmore's voice was different from Pruitt's, smoother, more controlled, with the administrative precision of someone who used procedure as a weapon rather than a shield. "You say you're an attorney. Do you have a bar card?" "I'm not required to present a bar card to observe a detention from a public sidewalk." Maya didn't move, didn't lower the phone. "And you haven't identified yourself. Name and badge number, please." Whitmore didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, inside the conversational distance, into the space where authority becomes physical proximity, and looked at Maya's phone screen. The live stream, the red live indicator, the viewer count. Her expression changed, not dramatically. Whitmore was too practiced for that, but enough. The corner of her mouth tightened. Her eyes narrowed by a fraction. "You're streaming this?" Whitmore's hand came up. Fast, practiced, the muscle memory of someone who had snatched phones from civilians' hands before and closed around the top edge of Maya's phone, like Maya's grip held. Her fingers locked around the device, both hands now, phone pressed against her chest, screen still facing outward, still live, still streaming. Whitmore pulled. Maya planted her feet. "Release my property." Maya's voice didn't waver, but her knuckles were white. "You have no legal basis to seize my phone without a warrant. I am recording on a public sidewalk. This is protected under the First Amendment and under Glick versus Cuniff, First Circuit, 2011. The tug of war lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds of a uniformed officer trying to take a phone from a civilian's hands on a public sidewalk while 20,000 people watched in real time. 3 seconds that would be screen captured, frame grabbed, and circulated on every social media platform within the hour. Whitmore released. She stepped back, not retreating, repositioning, and her face settled into the careful blankness of someone who had just realized that the moment she tried to create was the opposite of the moment that had been created. The live stream comment section detonated. "She tried to grab the phone. That's assault. That is literally assault. Someone screen record this, please." "Already did. Saved, backed up. This isn't going anywhere." Maya lowered the phone to waist level. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline, not fear, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "For the record, Officer She looked at Whitmore's nameplate. Whitmore just attempted to seize my phone without a warrant while I was recording on public property. I am noting this as a separate incident. Whitmore didn't respond. She turned and walked back toward Pruitt, leaning close to his ear. What she said was captured by Camera One's microphone, 4 syllables that would change the trajectory of the entire night. On the sidewalk, Maya watched Whitmore disappear around the corner and felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. She'd seen this choreography before, in body cam footage she'd reviewed for cases, in depositions she'd taken from officers who described perimeter checks that were really evidence staging operations. She didn't know what Whitmore was doing behind the house, but she knew the absence of a camera in that blind spot was not a comfort. The live stream was at 11,400 viewers. A comment from a user with a law school in their bio, they turned off the body cam. That's a policy violation. This is going to be a case. A comment from a journalist at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, whose name Maya recognized. Can anyone confirm the address? We're dispatching a reporter. A comment from someone in Decatur. I can't stop watching this. That man is on his own lawn. Maya checked the time, 12:18 a.m. Marcus had been handcuffed for 26 minutes. His wallet, containing his Georgia driver's license with the address 4-12 Bellhaven Lane printed in black and white, sat in Pruitt's vest pocket, still unchecked. Across the street, behind the curtain at 416 Bellhaven Lane, Anna Prescott had not moved. She stood in the dark of her living room, watching through the gap between curtain and window frame, and the thing in her chest, the heavy, unnamed thing that had settled there when the handcuffs went on, had grown. It had a shape now. It felt like the weight of a phone in her hand 11 minutes ago, and the 3 numbers she had pressed, and the voice she had used to describe the man across the street as strange and does not look like he belongs. She looked at Marcus on the ground. She looked at the suitcase against the magnolia tree. She looked at the gray suit jacket on the wet grass. And she saw, not with her eyes but with something deeper and less forgiving, that the man she had called 1-1 about was wearing the same shoes, the same general build, the same face as the man she had brought a chicken casserole to 3 weeks ago and asked, "Are you renting?" She had known. On some level below conscious thought, in the place where decisions are made before reasons are assembled to justify them, she had known who he was when she picked up the phone, and she had called anyway. Because the hour was late and the cap obscured his face, and the way he pulled at the door could have been was enough. In Bellhaven Estates, could have been had always been enough. Gerald would have gone outside. Gerald, who had been a high school principal for 30 years and who had known every student's name and every parent's face, would have opened the front door and called across the street before reaching for a phone. Gerald would have said, "Everything okay over there?" Because Gerald understood, in a way that Anna was only now beginning to understand, that the first question should always be a question, never a report. But Gerald was gone, and Anna had inherited the house, the street, the habits, including the habit of fear that masqueraded as caution, and the caution that masqueraded as responsibility, and the responsibility that somehow always led to the same phone call, about the same kind of person, at the same kind of hour. Anna didn't go outside, not yet. The shame hadn't reached the threshold where action becomes necessary. It was still building, a slow tide moving up from her stomach to her throat, rising with each minute Marcus spent on the ground. But she was close. Inside 412, behind the door that Marcus still couldn't open, Camera 4, the garage-mounted unit, captured something through its side-angle lens. Calder standing near the patrol car, holding his personal cell phone to his ear. Not the radio, his phone. A private call, unmonitored, unrecorded by dispatch. The call lasted 94 seconds. Calder's face during the call was partially visible. The garage camera caught his profile as he listened, nodded, nodded again, frowned, nodded. When the call ended, he slid the phone into his pocket and walked back to Pruitt. "Captain says hold the scene." Calder's voice was different now. Not commanding but relaying, the voice of a man passing instructions from above. "Don't release him yet. We need to verify the identification thoroughly." Marcus heard it. Maya heard it. Dispatch had confirmed ownership 5 minutes ago. Marcus's driver's license matched the address. The 911 call had been for suspicious person, not for any crime. And the order from Captain Dwight Lanier, relayed through a personal phone call outside official channels at 12:20 a.m., was to hold the homeowner longer. Officers, Maya's voice cut the night air. Dispatch has confirmed Mr. Ellery's residency. His identification matches this address. There is no legal basis for continued detention. I'm asking, on the record, in front of witnesses, and on a recording that is currently being viewed by, she glanced at her phone, 28,000 people, that you release Mr. Ellery immediately. The number hit like a physical force. 28,000. Pruitt looked at Maya's phone, looked at the cameras, looked at Calder. For the first time, the math was changing. Not the math of one black man in one expensive house in one 911. March 1 call, but a different equation. 28,000 witnesses, 4 cameras, a live stream that couldn't be deleted, and a woman who knew the law better than anyone holding a badge on that lawn. Calder's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. The garage camera caught his face, and the expression that crossed it wasn't annoyance, wasn't anger, wasn't the professional composure he'd worn all night. It was something closer to fear. A flash, brief, controlled, swallowed, but real. He didn't answer the call. Maya knelt on the sidewalk, still on public property, and spoke quietly to Marcus, close enough that camera one's microphone picked up every word. Mr. Ellery, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention? Mr. Ellery, not Marcus, not his first name. She said it the way you address someone whose position demands formality, the way you'd say Mr. Chairman or Mr. Secretary or something else. Something that Pruitt didn't notice, because the distinction between Marcus and Mr. Ellery meant nothing to him. Calder noticed. He noticed the way Maya said it. He noticed the way Marcus received it, without surprise, without gratitude, with the quiet acknowledgement of a man accustomed to being addressed that way, and the discomfort that had been building in Calder's face all night, the gradually deepening unease that had started when Marcus spoke from the ground with the precision of a legal filing, crystallized into something specific. Calder didn't know who Marcus Ellery was. Not yet, but he was beginning to understand that he didn't know, and that the not knowing was dangerous. On the live stream, the viewer count passed 31,000. A reporter from CNN's Atlanta bureau shared the link. The comment section was no longer a comment section. It was a record, time-stamped, crowdsourced, and permanent. Every observation, every screenshot, every frame grab was being saved, archived, and distributed by thousands of people who understood that footage could be deleted from servers, but not from the internet, and that the truth of what happened at 412 Bellhaven Lane on a Thursday night in July was now beyond the control of anyone wearing a badge. Marcus looked up at Maya from the ground, his eyes steady, unbroken, holding something that wasn't defeat and wasn't defiance, but was the thing that exists between them, the thing that gets you through, met hers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Maya looked back, and in her expression, visible on the live stream, visible to the 31,000 people watching, visible to the officers who would later claim they hadn't noticed anything unusual about the interaction, was something that Pruitt should have recognized and didn't. Respect, not friendship, not sympathy, respect. The kind that is earned by position, by accomplishment, by years of work that most people never see. The kind that a woman who knew exactly who Marcus Ellery was and what he could do carried in her voice every time she said his name, Mr. Ellery. Calder's phone buzzed again, different number this time. He looked at the screen, and his face changed, past discomfort, past unease, into a territory that the garage camera captured in 3 frames of high-definition footage that would later be entered as Exhibit 7 in a federal complaint. Sergeant Nolan Calder, at 12:26 a.m., receiving a phone call from a number he recognized and choosing not to answer it with an expression that 3 separate body language experts would later describe independently as consistent with acute fear. He slid the phone back into his pocket. He didn't tell Pruitt about the call. He didn't tell anyone. But something had shifted, the certainty that had carried the night, the simple math of badge and authority in a 911 call was fracturing. Pruitt still stood over Marcus. Whitmore was still circling the house. Vivian Hargrove was still managing the neighbors. But the ground beneath all of it was moving, and the only person on that lawn who seemed completely still, completely certain, completely unbroken was the man on his knees in the wet grass with his hands cuffed behind his back. The live stream didn't blink. The cameras didn't blink. The 31,000 people watching didn't blink. And somewhere in the dark, in a fold of the night that none of them could see, the thing that was coming for Gage Pruitt and Nolan Calder and Tess Whitmore and Captain Dwight Lanier was already in motion, already building, already inevitable. Because the wallet in Pruitt's vest pocket, the one he'd pulled from Marcus's back pocket 29 minutes ago, the one he glanced at and dismissed, the one that contained a Georgia driver's license matching the address of the house he was standing in front of, also contained something else. A second card, tucked behind the license, in the slot most people use for a gym membership or an insurance card. It wasn't a gym membership. It wasn't an insurance card. It was a credential that, had Pruitt bothered to flip past the first card, would have ended the encounter in 4 seconds and started a different kind of encounter that would have ended Pruitt's career in 4 weeks. He hadn't looked. He hadn't checked. He had decided before he arrived, before he stepped out of the patrol car, before the flashlight hit Marcus's face, and the decision had blinded him to the one piece of information that would have saved him from everything that was coming. They just didn't know it yet, but they would, and soon. The dispatch confirmation came at 12:09 a.m., 18 minutes and 17 seconds after Pruitt had put Marcus on the ground. Calder was standing near the patrol car, shoulder radio in one hand, notebook in the other. The night had acquired a texture that Calder hadn't anticipated. The kind of texture that comes when a routine call turns complicated and the complications keep multiplying. The live stream he didn't know about. The attorney on the sidewalk he hadn't expected. The phone call from Captain Lanier that had shifted the encounter from field discretion to institutional management. And now dispatch, coming through the radio with the detached precision of a system that didn't care about narratives or justifications or the career consequences of the information it was about to deliver. The dispatcher's voice was flat, professional, the particular monotone of someone reading a database entry with no more emotion than a machine would. Property at 412 Bellhaven Lane, Fulton County. Registered owner, Ellery, Marcus D. Purchase recorded June 28th, current year. No outstanding warrants, no stolen property reports, no flags. Calder heard every word. His pen stopped moving on the notebook. The night air, humid, thick with cicada song and the low idle of patrol car engines, pressed against his face like something waiting. His eyes drifted across the lawn to where Marcus knelt, face still angled toward the grass, wrists still cuffed behind his back, shirt soaked through, and around him, 3 officers, 6 neighbors, and a live stream audience that had crossed 40,000 without anyone on that lawn knowing it. Calder didn't move for 14 seconds. The garage-mounted camera, camera 4, side angle, captured those 14 seconds in high definition. Calder's jaw working, his eyes shifting between Marcus and Pruitt, the notebook lowering to his side. A decision being made, not the decision to relay the information, because that was procedurally mandatory, but the decision about how to relay it, which words to use, which tone, which framing would protect the narrative that had been built over the past 18 minutes. 14 seconds. Then he walked to Pruitt. Pruitt, he said it the way a man says a word he doesn't want to say, quietly, with the reluctance of someone delivering a verdict he disagrees with. Dispatch confirmed he's the homeowner. Pruitt turned, and the expression that crossed his face, visible on camera 1, visible on the live stream, visible to Maya standing 12 feet away on the sidewalk, was not relief. It was not embarrassment. It was not the sheepish recognition of a mistake that could be corrected with an apology and an uncuffed wrist. It was irritation, the tight-lipped, jaw-clenched irritation of a man who had been told he was wrong by a system he expected to agree with him. As though dispatch had committed the offense, not by confirming the truth, but by failing to confirm the story Pruitt had already written in his head. Doesn't matter. Pruitt's voice was low, not a whisper. He wasn't trying to hide the words from Marcus or Maya. He simply didn't think anyone else was listening. But the body cam microphone, the one he thought he'd killed 20 minutes ago, the one that was still recording audio into a buffer partition he didn't know existed, captured everything. He could have bought the place last week with drug money for all we know. You see the car? Lexus. Brand new. In this neighborhood? Come on. Whitmore was standing 3 feet to his right. She'd returned from her perimeter walk, from the blind spot between cameras 2 and 3, from whatever she'd spent 45 seconds doing there. And she was listening with the attentive stillness of someone taking mental notes. Just make sure your report says uncooperative and refuse to identify. Whitmore's voice was even quieter than Pruitt's. Practical, collaborative. The voice of a colleague helping another colleague workshop the language that would transform a wrongful detention into a justified one. Keep it clean. The body cam microphone recorded it. Timestamp 12:11 a.m. File format .wav mono 16-bit 44.1 kHz. Stored in a partition labeled buffer audio that the Axon Body 3 system creates automatically when video is manually deactivated. A design feature intended to prevent exactly this kind of evidence destruction, and one that neither Pruitt, nor Whitmore, nor Calder knew existed. IT specialist Hernandez would extract it 6 days later. He would listen to it twice, write chain of custody confirmed on the evidence log, and forward it to internal affairs with a note that read, audio continues for 24 minutes after video deactivation. Contents significant. On the sidewalk, Maya didn't have the body cam audio. She wouldn't have it for weeks. But she had something else. The Ring camera timestamps, the dispatch records she'd requested through her own 911 call, and the arithmetic of injustice laid out in minutes and seconds. She raised her phone. The live stream was at 44,000 viewers. She spoke directly into the camera, not performing, not narrating, but documenting. The way she documented everything, with the methodical precision of someone who understood that facts presented clearly were more devastating than anger delivered loudly. For anyone watching, let me walk you through the timeline. Her voice was level, a courtroom voice, a closing argument voice. Camera 1, front door, 11:47 p.m. Mr. Ellery approaches his own front door with luggage. 11:49, Officer Pruitt arrives on scene. 11:51, Mr. Ellery is ordered to the ground. 11:52, Mr. Ellery is handcuffed. His wallet is confiscated. His identification, a Georgia driver's license listing this address, is placed in the officer's pocket without examination. She paused, one beat, the kind of pause that trial attorneys use before the number that matters. 12:07 a.m., 18 minutes later, Sergeant Calder contacts dispatch to verify property ownership. 12:09, dispatch confirms Marcus Ellery is the registered owner. No warrants, no flags, nothing. Another pause. He was handcuffed for 18 minutes before anyone bothered to check whether he lived in his own house. The livestream comment section moved so fast it became unreadable, a vertical river of outrage, legal analysis, personal testimony, and shared fury scrolling past at a rate that Maya's phone could barely render. The viewer count crossed 50,000, then 54. Then, when a verified account with 2 million followers shared the link with the caption, "This is happening right now in Atlanta," it jumped to 61,000 in 90 seconds. Maya lowered the phone. Her shoulder still throbbed where Pruitt's palm had connected. The bruise was forming. She could feel the heat of it under the torn blazer, the dull ache that would sharpen over the next 12 hours into a purple testament to what minimal contact actually felt like. At 12:13 a.m., Calder's personal phone rang again. Not his radio, not dispatch. His phone, the one he'd used to call Captain Lanier 5 minutes earlier. The call that had produced the order to hold the scene and verify thoroughly. The order that had kept Marcus on the ground for an additional 4 minutes after dispatch had already confirmed his ownership. Camera 4 caught Calder's profile as he looked at the screen. This time the caller wasn't Lanier. The number was different, and the reaction was different. Calder's body went rigid. Not the trained rigidity of an officer bracing for action, but the involuntary rigidity of a man who has just been surprised by something he wasn't prepared for. His thumb hovered over the answer button. Hovered, then swiped left. Declined. He slid the phone into his pocket with more care than the gesture required. The way you handle something that might explode if you move too quickly. Then he turned to Pruitt, and what he said was the first thing all night that sounded like actual urgency rather than performed authority. Release him now. We're done here. Pruitt stared. But the captain said, I know what the captain said. I'm telling you. Release him. Get the cuffs off now. Something in Calder's voice, something that hadn't been there before, something that existed beyond rank and procedure and the institutional comfort of doing what you were told, made Pruitt move. He walked to Marcus, knelt behind him, and unlocked the handcuffs with 2 turns of the key. The metal separated from Marcus's wrists. The marks were already visible. Red bands across both wrist bones, the skin compressed and irritated in a pattern that matched the width and edge profile of standard issue Smith & Wesson Model 100 handcuffs. The marks would darken over the next 2 days into purple-black stripes that Marcus would photograph, document, and include in a file that Maya would later label Exhibit 2. Marcus didn't stand immediately. He stayed on his knees for 3 seconds, not because he couldn't stand, but because his body needed to recalibrate, to register that the pressure on his lower back was gone, that his arms could move forward, that the blood was returning to his fingertips in a hot rush of pins and static. Then he stood, slowly. The way a man stands when he wants every person watching to see the effort, the stiffness in his legs from 34 minutes on wet ground, the wince as his shoulders rotated forward for the first time, the grass stains on both knees of his trousers, the muddy oval on the left knee where Pruitt's boot had pressed while adjusting the cuffs. Pruitt held out the wallet, not extended, dropped. He let it fall from waist height, and it hit the grass between Marcus's feet with a soft sound that Camera One recorded and that the live stream audience, 67,000 people now, watched in real time. Marcus looked at the wallet on the ground. He looked at Pruitt. The space between the 2 men, 3 feet of night air and wet grass, and the particular silence that follows when power has been exercised and must now account for itself, contained more than either of them could say. Marcus bent, picked up the wallet, straightened. You're free to go, Calder said from behind Pruitt. The phrase was procedurally correct and personally absurd. Free to go inside his own house, on his own property. In the neighborhood where he paid taxes and mowed his own lawn and kept his bookshelves organized by subject because the act of ordering knowledge was the thing that made him feel most at home. Marcus didn't reply. He walked to the magnolia tree where his suitcase lay, picked it up, gathered the scattered toiletries, toothbrush, razor, cologne, and placed them inside. He found the gray suit jacket on the grass, lifted it, and saw the boot print on the left lapel. Muddy, clear. The tread pattern of a standard-issue police boot pressed into fabric that Marcus had chosen for his first week in a new position, at a new bench, in a new city. He folded the jacket over his arm, walked to the front door, pulled out his phone, opened the Ring app, and remotely unlocked the smart lock from the outside. The solution he would have found 10 minutes after arriving if he'd been given 10 minutes instead of handcuffs. The door opened, he stepped inside, closed it behind him. The porch light stayed on, the cameras kept recording. The live stream, 71,000 viewers at its peak, continued streaming to an audience that had watched a man be detained, humiliated, and released on his own property without a single officer saying the word sorry. Pruitt returned to his patrol car. Whitmore to hers. Calder stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, looking at the closed door, looking at the cameras, looking at his phone in his pocket, before walking to his vehicle and driving away without filing a report that night. The neighbors went inside. Vivian Hargrove drove back to Bellhaven Circle. Craig Boatwright closed his front door. Todd Meacham carried his beer bottle to the recycling bin, a small act of order in a night that had produced nothing but chaos. And across the street, at 416 Bellhaven Lane, Anna Prescott finally opened her front door. She stepped onto the porch, bare feet on a cold brick. She crossed her own lawn, small steps, uncertain, the gait of someone walking towards something they're afraid of, crossed the street and stopped at the curb in front of 412. The house was dark except for the porch light. The cameras blinked their red LEDs in silence. The lawn glistened with dew and the memory of what had happened on it. Anna stood there for 47 seconds. Camera one recorded her, a slim, white-haired figure in a blue nightgown, arms wrapped around herself, standing at the edge of a property where a man she'd called strange had just been treated like a criminal for the crime of coming home. She didn't knock on Marcus's door. She didn't call out. She stood and she looked, and whatever she saw in the dark windows, in the quiet porch, in the scattered grass where the suitcase had tumbled, whatever she saw, there was enough to keep her standing on that curb for 47 seconds, which was 47 seconds longer than anyone else in Bellhaven Estates stayed. Then she went home. The live stream ended at 12:41 a.m. Total duration, 2 hours and 14 minutes. Peak concurrent viewers, 71,000. Total views in the first 48 hours, 2.3 million. The video was downloaded, screen recorded, and mirrored on 14 news websites before the Fulton County Police Department issued its first public statement. 36 hours later, 23 words long. The department is aware of a recent incident and is conducting an internal review. We are committed to fair and impartial policing. No name, no apology, no acknowledgement of error. 23 words that said nothing and meant less. If you've been watching from the beginning, you know what's coming. But even if you think you figured it out, you haven't. What Marcus Ellery has been carrying in that wallet is about to change everything. Keep watching. 7 a.m., Friday morning, 12 hours after the handcuffs came off. Marcus sat at the kitchen table of 412 Bellhaven Lane. Coffee, black, no sugar, brewed at 6:15 a.m. from a French press he'd unpacked 3 weeks ago and used every morning since. A glass of water, a plate with toast he'd made and not eaten, and a leather briefcase, the same one he carried to work every day, the one that had been in the trunk of his Lexus during the flight delay, sitting open on the chair beside him. Maya arrived at 6:52 a.m. She'd slept 3 hours. The bruise on her shoulder had bloomed overnight into a purple oval the size of a plum, visible at the collar line of her t-shirt. She'd photographed it in her bathroom mirror at 5 a.m., 4 angles, timestamp visible on her phone's camera, and emailed the photos to herself with the subject line, Exhibit 9, shoulder contusion, Pruitt physical contact. She sat across from Marcus, laptop open, legal pad to the right, half a page of notes already written in her precise, slanting hand. I've drafted the complaint. She turned the laptop so Marcus could see the screen. 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Named defendants, Officer Gage Pruitt, Sergeant Nolan Calder, Officer Tess Whitmore, and the Fulton County Police Department. I'm also recommending a referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Marcus looked at the screen, read the first paragraph, read the second. His face didn't change, not because he wasn't affected, but because the professional mask he wore at work had become, over years of practice, indistinguishable from his actual face. Then he reached for the briefcase. He opened it. Inside, 3 manila folders, a legal pad, 2 pens, and a single envelope. Heavy stock, cream-colored, with a seal embossed in the upper left corner that Maya recognized before she read the text. The seal of the United States District Court, Northern District of Georgia. Marcus placed the envelope on the table between them. He didn't open it. He'd already opened it 3 weeks ago, in a different city, in a different life. He just set it there and let it speak. Maya looked at the envelope, looked at the seal, looked at Marcus. Open it, he said. She did. Inside, a single document, 2 pages, printed on bond paper with a watermark visible when held to light. The header read, Commission of Appointment, the President of the United States of America. Below that informal typeface, to all who shall see these presents, greeting, know ye, that reposing special trust and confidence in the wisdom, uprightness, and learning of Marcus D. Ellery of the state of Georgia, I have nominated, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, do appoint him a judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. Date of commission, 3 weeks prior. The day Marcus moved to Bellhaven. Maya read it twice. Her hands, the same hands that had held a phone steady while an officer pushed her, the same hands that had gripped the device while another officer tried to rip it away, trembled. She set the document down. Marcus, I know. You're a federal judge. I know. She stopped, swallowed, started again. The case, the DOJ case, United States versus Fulton County Police Department, the pattern or practice investigation. I'm the presiding judge. Marcus picked up his coffee, took a sip, set it down. Or I was. The case was assigned to me 2 weeks before I moved here. I've reviewed the preliminary filings. DOJ alleges systemic racial profiling in traffic enforcement, failure to discipline officers with repeated complaints, and obstruction of internal investigations by supervisory personnel. He paused. Last night, I was handcuffed for 34 minutes on my own front lawn by an officer employed by the department I'm supposed to oversee, which means Maya finished it for him. She already knew. She was a civil rights attorney. She knew the statutes the way a surgeon knows anatomy, not abstractly, but functionally, the way knowledge works when it's been used on living cases. 28 U.S.C., Section 455. Maya's voice was quiet. Judicial disqualification. A judge shall disqualify himself in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned, including where the judge has personal knowledge of disputed evidentiary facts or where the judge has a personal bias concerning a party. Marcus nodded. I'll file the recusal motion today. And there it was. Not fury, not triumph, not the dramatic confrontation that the 71,000 people who'd watched the live stream might have imagined. The judge storming into the precinct, the badge on the table, the "do you know who I am" moment that plays well in fiction and almost never happens in the procedural reality of the American judiciary. Instead, a man sitting in his kitchen, drinking coffee, making the ethically correct decision to remove himself from a case that his own victimization had compromised, choosing the rules over the revenge, choosing procedure, the same word he'd used on his knees in the wet grass, over the satisfaction of presiding over the trial of the department that had put him there. The evidence doesn't disappear because I step aside. Marcus set down the mug. The live stream footage, the ring recordings, the dispatch logs, my physical injuries, all of it becomes part of Doye's case file. They'll assign a replacement judge. The case proceeds. Maya stared at him. 6 years of police accountability work. 6 years of watching victims wait months for hearings that produced nothing. Of filing complaints that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Of documenting patterns that everyone could see and no one would admit. And here was a man who could have wielded more institutional power against the Fulton County PD than any complaint or lawsuit or live stream ever could, and he was recusing himself. Because the rules said he had to, because the integrity of the system mattered more than the satisfaction of using it. She closed the laptop. Okay. She picked up her pen. Then we do this the other way. I file the Section 1983 suit on your behalf. Civil, not criminal. I file a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. I submit the ring footage, the dispatch logs, and my documentation of the shoulder contact as evidence. And I submit a FOIA request for every complaint ever filed against Pruitt, every disciplinary action, every internal review involving officers at the Northwest District. Marcus looked at the letter of commission on the table. 3 weeks ago, it had represented the culmination of a career, 2 decades of law school, clerkships, appellate work, in the grueling Senate confirmation process that had ended with a 53-47 vote and a handshake with the president in the Oval Office. He'd moved to Atlanta believing he was starting the most important chapter of his professional life. Instead, the first chapter had been written on a wet lawn at midnight by an officer who hadn't bothered to check his wallet. The DOJ case file, Marcus began. I know. Maya was already thinking ahead. The preliminary filings alleged 12 specific incidents of racial profiling over a 30-month period. 7 involved traffic stops, 3 involved pedestrian encounters, 2 involved calls to residences, noise complaints, suspicious person reports. In every case, the subject was black, the officer was white, and the internal review was closed without disciplinary action. And the supervisory chain? Lanier approved 9 of the 12 closures. The other 3 were handled by a lieutenant who retired last year, pension intact, no findings against him. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at the coffee growing cold in his mug, at the toast he still hadn't eaten, at the briefcase open on the chair beside him with its manila folders and legal pads. The tools of a life devoted to the idea that law, applied correctly, could produce justice. Not perfect justice, not fast justice, but the slow, grinding, incremental kind that moved the line forward by inches and called those inches progress. Last night had measured the distance between that idea and reality. The distance was 34 minutes long, and it smelled like wet grass and fertilizer and the metallic tang of handcuffs on wrist bones. How long will the FOIA take? Maya almost laughed. In my experience, anywhere from 6 weeks to never. It took 6 weeks. 42 days from the date of Maya's request to the date, a brown envelope arrived at the offices of the Southern Legal Defense Fund containing 340 pages of documents, some complete, some partially redacted, and 112 pages blacked out entirely. Every word hidden behind the thick marker that left nothing visible except, on certain pages, the formatting of email headers. What the unredacted pages revealed was a pattern, not a suspicion, not an implication, a pattern. Documented, time-stamped, cross-referenced, and damning. 4 formal complaints had been filed against Officer Gage Pruitt in the 18 months preceding the Bellhaven incident. 4 complaints from 4 different civilians, all alleging racial profiling during traffic enforcement or pedestrian encounters. All describing the same behavior: aggressive approach, refusal to verify identification, escalation without cause, language suggesting racial bias. All 4 had been reviewed by the same supervisor, Captain Dwight Lanier. All 4 had been classified the same way. Unfounded. One email, dated March 14th, 4 months before the Bellhaven incident, was particularly notable. The header read, from D.T. Lanier, FultonCountyPD.gov, to Internal Affairs Division. Date, March 14th. Subject, Review, Complaint, number 2024-087. Officer G. Pruitt. The body of the email in full. After review, I'm recommending this complaint be classified as unfounded. Officer Pruitt followed departmental guidelines during the encounter. Complainant's allegations are inconsistent with officer's report and dash cam footage. No further action required. Captain Lanier complaint, number 2024-087, had been filed by a black woman, a pediatrician named Dr. Carla Owens, who had been stopped by Pruitt in the Bellhaven area at 9:40 p.m. on a Tuesday for matching a suspect description. No suspect description had been broadcast by dispatch that evening. Dr. Owens' complaint described Pruitt refusing to provide his name or badge number, confiscating her license for 11 minutes, and telling her, according to her written statement, "People like you driving cars like this in neighborhoods like this raise questions." Lanier had dismissed it without convening a review committee, without interviewing Dr. Owens, without reviewing the dash cam footage that his email claimed was inconsistent with her allegations. Footage that, when Maya later subpoenaed it through discovery, turned out to have been deleted from the department server 2 days after Lanier's email. The deletion had been logged. The log entry showed the user ID associated with the deletion. Whitmore type T, timestamp, March 16th, 2 days after Lanier's email. Terminal, a desktop computer in the evidence management office on the 2nd floor of the Northwest Precinct, a room that required badge access and that maintained its own entry log. Whitmore had badged in at 6:42 p.m., off-duty hours after the evidence office staff had gone home, and badged out at 6:58 p.m., 16 minutes, long enough to find the file, delete it, and empty the recycle bin. Short enough that no one would question a routine visit to the evidence office by a patrol officer checking case files. The precision of it, the timing, the off-hours access, the 16-minute window, suggested practice. This was not a woman making an impulsive decision to protect a colleague. This was a woman executing a procedure she had performed before, in the same room at the same time of day, with the same result. Evidence that contradicted an officer's report disappeared, and the report became the only record. Tess Whitmore, the same officer who had whispered "Gage, your cam" on the lawn of 412 Bellhaven Lane, the same officer who had tried to grab Maya's phone, the same officer who had spent 45 seconds in the blind spot between cameras 2 and 3, doing something that no evidence could confirm and no explanation could account for. Maya read the FOIA documents in her office over 2 days. She organized them chronologically. She cross-referenced complaint dates with Pruitt's patrol schedules, Lanier's review timelines, and Whitmore's access logs. She built a spreadsheet that tracked every data point. And when she was done, the spreadsheet told a story that was worse than the one she'd expected. Not one bad officer, a system, a loop. Pruitt profiled. Civilians complained. Lanier buried the complaints. Whitmore cleaned the evidence. And the loop continued. 4 times in 18 months, each rotation wearing a groove in the department's accountability mechanisms until the mechanisms existed in name only. And then Pruitt had done it again, at 412 Bellhaven Lane, to a federal judge. The body cam audio arrived the same week as the FOIA documents. Internal Affairs had extracted it as part of their investigation. Case number IA 2024-0341, opened 3 days after the Bellhaven incident, following a formal complaint filed by Maya on Marcus's behalf. IT Specialist Hernandez, 14 years in the department's digital forensics unit, had imaged Pruitt's Axon Body 3 camera, identified the buffer audio partition, and extracted 24 minutes of continuous audio recorded between 12:14 a.m. and 12:38 a.m., the period after Pruitt manually deactivated the video feed. The transcript was entered into the IA case file. Selected excerpts were later allowed at the disciplinary hearing. The full audio, with timestamps, speaker identification confirmed by voice pattern analysis, contained the following exchanges. Timestamp 0016. These people move into a neighborhood and think they own the place. Pruitt's voice. The audio analysis confirmed vocal stress patterns consistent with contempt rather than professional assessment. Well, technically he does own the place. Whitmore's response. Dry, factual, and immediately undercut by what followed. You know what I mean. Pruitt again. The phrase that said everything his training had taught him not to say, and that his body cam, which he thought was off, preserved for the official record. Timestamp 0023. After Calder's dispatch confirmation. Doesn't change anything. He could have had someone buy it for him. I've seen it before. Straw purchases. Pruitt's voice. The theory, presented without evidence, without investigation, without anything beyond the assumption that a black man with a new Lexus and a house in Bellhaven couldn't have acquired either through legitimate means. Just right, uncooperative. Calder will back us up. Whitmore, the instruction, direct, collaborative, procedurally precise, to falsify the arrest report. Not a suggestion. A directive from an officer who had done this before, who knew the language that transformed wrongful detention into justified procedure, who understood that uncooperative was the word that covered everything. Timestamp 0031. The attorney, the one with the phone, she's going to be a problem. Whitmore's voice. Quieter. More calculating. She pushed me first. Pruitt. A lie. The cameras had recorded the opposite, and the live stream's 67,000 viewers had watched Pruitt's palm connect with Maya's shoulder, not the other way around. Then that's what the report says. Whitmore. The audio ended at 0:38 with Pruitt placing a phone call, not to dispatch, not to Calder, but to an unknown number. The last words recorded were "Mayastu. Yeah, I handled it. He's nobody. Just some guy. He's nobody. Just some guy." After 0038, the audio file contained a 14-minute gap, from 0038 to 052. No sound, no static, no ambient noise, complete digital silence. IT Specialist Hernandez noted in his report, gap in audio buffer between 0038 and 052 is inconsistent with equipment malfunction. Buffer partition shows evidence of manual data deletion. Deletion method, overwrite with null values. This is not a function available through standard officer controls and would require access to the device's maintenance interface. Someone had deleted 14 minutes of audio, someone who knew how, someone who had access to the body cam's maintenance interface. A level of access that patrol officers like Pruitt did not have, but that evidence technicians and supervisory personnel did. Pruitt said he didn't know how to access the maintenance interface. Whitmore said she hadn't touched the device after the encounter. Calder said he'd left the scene before the relevant time period. Nobody claimed responsibility. The 14 minutes remained a void, a rectangular hole in the evidentiary record that internal affairs could not fill, and that Maya, in her legal pad, marked with a red asterisk and the notation, "Who deleted this?" 10 weeks after the night at 412 Bellhaven Lane, the Internal Affairs Disciplinary Hearing convened in a conference room on the 4th floor of the Fulton County Police Department Administrative Building, a beige room with fluorescent lighting, a rectangular table, and 3 chairs on one side for the review panel. Deputy Chief Martha Spaulding presided. 15 years in the department, 11 in administrative roles. She wore a navy suit and reading glasses that she adjusted with the mechanical frequency of someone who had spent too many hours in rooms like this, listening to evidence of things she couldn't fix and reaching conclusions that satisfied no one. 2 other panel members sat beside her, a civilian oversight representative named Howard Marsh and a departmental liaison from the city attorney's office named Kim Tron. Pruitt sat on the opposite side of the table. He wore civilian clothes, gray slacks, white shirt, no tie, as specified by hearing protocol. His police union representative, a broad-shouldered man named Frank Gallo, who had defended officers in 37 disciplinary hearings and lost 4, sat to his right. Gallo's legal pad was full. His face was empty. The practiced blankness of someone who had heard every version of every excuse and knew which ones worked and which ones didn't. Marcus was not present. He had recused himself from the DOJ case the day after the incident, filing the motion under 28 U.S.C. Section 455 with the Chief Judge of the Northern District, who had accepted it within 48 hours and reassigned United States v. Fulton County Police Department to Judge Rebecca Okafor. Marcus's absence from the hearing was deliberate. His presence would have created additional conflicts and given Pruitt's defense an argument about undue influence. He stayed in his chambers 8 miles away, presiding over other cases, other lives, other records. Maya was present. She sat at a table perpendicular to the panel, her laptop open, 2 boxes of documents at her feet, and the calm, focused expression of someone who had spent 10 weeks building a case out of timestamps and deleted audio files and redacted emails and a bruise that had faded from her shoulder, but not from the photograph she'd taken of it. Before the hearing began, in the hallway outside the conference room, Gallo had approached her. He was taller than she expected, 6'2", broad through the chest, with the kind of physical presence that police union representatives cultivated, because it reminded everyone in the room that they stood between officers and consequences, and that the space they occupied was not small. "Ms. Vance," he extended a hand. Maya took it. His grip was firm but not aggressive, calibrated, professional, the handshake of a man who controlled every gesture because every gesture was a negotiation. "I want you to know, this hearing is going to be fair. My client has rights. The process has rules. I expect both to be respected." "I expect the same." Maya withdrew her hand. "I also expect the process to account for the 4 prior complaints that were classified as unfounded without committee review, the deleted evidence, and the 24 minutes of audio that Officer Pruitt didn't know he was recording. If the process accounts for all of that and still finds in his favor, then I'll accept the outcome. But the process has to see everything first." Gallo's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, the micro-adjustment of a man recalculating odds. He'd read Maya's preliminary filing. He knew what was in the audio. He knew about the FOIA documents. And he knew as clearly as Maya knew, as clearly as anyone who had worked inside the system long enough to understand its mechanics, that the evidence was bad. Not ambiguous, not debatable, bad. Everyone deserves representation. Gallo said it quietly, not a defense directly, but a statement of position. The sentence a man says when he knows his client did the thing and the best he can do is manage the fallout. "Everyone does," Maya agreed. including Marcus Ellery, including Dr. Carla Owens, including every person Officer Pruitt stopped, searched, handcuffed, and humiliated while Captain Lanier made sure the complaints disappeared. Gallo held her gaze for 2 seconds, then he nodded, once a small acknowledgement of something he would never say out loud, and walked into the hearing room. Maya followed. She arranged her documents. She opened her laptop, and she began. She opened with the timeline. On the night of July 19th, Officer Gage Pruitt responded to a 911 call at 412 Bellhaven Lane. Maya's voice was the same voice she'd used on the sidewalk, level, precise, devoid of performance. He arrived at 11:49 p.m. Within 3 minutes, he had handcuffed the homeowner, Marcus Ellery, on his own front lawn. He confiscated Mr. Ellery's wallet, which contained a Georgia driver's license listing the address of the property. He did not examine the identification. He did not contact dispatch to verify ownership. He did not ask Mr. Ellery a single question about his residency. She paused, adjusted a document on the table. 18 minutes later, at 12:07 a.m., Sergeant Calder contacted dispatch, which confirmed Mr. Ellery's ownership. Despite this confirmation, officers continued to detain Mr. Ellery for an additional 25 minutes, pursuant to a phone call from Captain Lanier instructing them to hold the scene. Gallo raised a hand. "Ms. Vance, I'm not finished." Maya didn't look at him. "During the encounter, Officer Pruitt made physical contact with me, pushing my shoulder while I stood on a public sidewalk exercising my First Amendment right to observe and record. Officer Whitmore attempted to seize my phone without a warrant. In body cam audio, which Officer Pruitt believed had been deactivated, recorded statements by both Pruitt and Whitmore that reflect racial bias, coordination of a false narrative, and explicit instruction to falsify the official report." She opened the laptop and pressed play. The room heard Pruitt's voice, tinny through the laptop speakers but unmistakable. "These people move into a neighborhood and think they own the place." Then Whitmore, "Wished right uncooperative. Calder will back us up." Then Pruitt again, "He's nobody. Just some guy." The audio echoed against the beige walls. Spaulding's pen stopped moving. Howard Marsh removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Kim Tran wrote something on her legal pad without looking up. Gallo leaned toward the table. "Deputy Chief, the union would like to note that the audio was extracted from a buffer partition that Officer Pruitt was not aware existed. He had a reasonable expectation that the device was fully deactivated. The evidentiary value of the recording is not affected by the officer's awareness of it." Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Georgia is a one-party consent state. The body cam is department property operating on department servers. There is no privacy expectation in statements made during an official encounter." Gallo's jaw tightened. He wrote something on his legal pad. He didn't respond. Maya continued. She presented the FOIA documents. She walked through each of the 4 prior complaints, dates, names, allegations, and showed that each had been classified as unfounded by Captain Lanier, without committee review, without complainant interviews, without independent investigation. She showed the email from March 14th. She showed the access log proving that Whitmore had deleted the dash cam footage from Dr. Owens's complaint 2 days after Lanier's dismissal. This is not a single officer making a single mistake. Maya closed the laptop. This is a pattern, sustained, protected, and maintained by supervisory personnel who use their authority to shield Officer Pruitt from accountability. The pattern includes racial profiling, evidence destruction, complaint suppression, and, on the night of July 19th, false detention of a homeowner, physical contact with a civilian, deactivation of a body cam, and coordination of a false report. Pruitt had been sitting still throughout Maya's presentation. Jaw locked, hands flat on the table, eyes fixed on a point somewhere between Maya and the wall behind her. But when she said false report, something broke. He pushed his chair back, the scrape of metal legs on linoleum, loud, aggressive, and stood. "I responded to a legitimate call." His voice was louder than anything the hearing room had heard all morning. Gallo grabbed his arm, hard, the grip of a man pulling a client back from a cliff. But Pruitt pulled free. "A 911 call from a resident. I followed protocol. I secured the scene. Sit down. Spaulding's voice cut through the room. Not loud, sharp, the kind of sharpness that comes from 15 years of sitting in rooms where men in uniform forgot that the uniform didn't make them the authority in every room. You will have an opportunity to respond through your representative. Sit down or I will recess this hearing and add a contempt notation to your file. Gallo pulled Pruitt's arm again. This time Pruitt sat. The chair scraped back into position. His hands were shaking, not visibly, not to anyone more than 3 feet away, but Gallo saw it, and his expression shifted from professional blankness to something that looked for a moment like calculation. He leaned toward Pruitt and whispered something. The hearing room microphone didn't catch it. But Pruitt's face changed, the anger draining away, replaced by something flatter, more controlled, and more frightened. Gallo's defense was procedural and predictable. Officer Pruitt had responded to a legitimate NAMRT 111 call. He had followed standard protocol for a suspicious person encounter. The delay in dispatch verification was attributable to scene security priorities, a judgment call within the officer's discretion. The physical contact with Miss Vance was incidental, not intentional, and fell within the scope of scene management. The body cam deactivation was a mistake, not a policy violation. The officer believed the encounter had been resolved and was powering down his equipment. As for the audio statements, Gallo paused. He'd been doing this long enough to know that some evidence couldn't be explained away, only contextualized. Officer Pruitt acknowledges that his language was inappropriate. He has expressed willingness to undergo additional training. But inappropriate language, while regrettable, does not constitute a disciplinary violation in the absence of discriminatory action. Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. The handcuffs had been the action. The 18 minutes had been the action. The boot print on the suit jacket had been the action. The wallet in the vest pocket, unchecked, had been the action. Anna Prescott arrived at the hearing at 11:40 a.m. She sat in the back row of the gallery, a public hearing, open to observers. Wearing the same blue cotton blouse she'd worn on the morning she brought a casserole to 412 Bellhaven Lane. She carried nothing. No documents, no phone, just herself and the weight of what she'd come to say. When the panel opened the floor to witness statements, Anna stood. She didn't wait to be called. She stood the way people stand when they've been rehearsing something for 10 weeks and are afraid that if they wait another minute, they won't say it at all. I'm Anna Prescott. Her voice was thin. Not weak, thin, the way old paper is thin, carrying the weight of what's written on it despite its fragility. I live at 416 Bellhaven Lane. I've lived there for 31 years. I'm the one who called 911. The room went quiet. Spaulding looked up from her notes. Howard Marsh leaned forward. Even Gallo turned in his chair. I called because I saw a man I didn't recognize at a door in my neighborhood. I've lived there 31 years. I know every face on that street. Anna's hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles white, fingers interlaced, the grip of someone holding themselves together. But the truth is, I didn't call because he was unfamiliar. She paused. The pause lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, 68 years of assumptions, 31 years of vigilance in one night of watching a man kneel in his own yard collapsed into a single admission. I called because he was black and unfamiliar. And I'm only now honest enough to say that. The hearing room was silent, not the productive silence of deliberation, the stunned silence of the truth that no one in the room had expected to hear stated so plainly, so simply, without qualification or defense. I'm not here to excuse myself, Anna's voice steadied. I made a phone call based on assumptions I didn't examine. A man spent 34 minutes on the ground because of that call. I can't undo that. But I can say, on the record, that the assumptions I made were based on his race, not on his behavior. And the officers who responded treated him as though my assumptions were facts. They didn't check, they didn't ask, they took my fear, and they turned it into force. And she stopped, blinked, resumed. I am responsible for starting it, but they are responsible for what they did with it. Anna sat down. She didn't look at anyone. She looked at her hands, still clasped, still white-knuckled, and she stayed in the back row for the rest of the hearing without speaking again. The panel deliberated for 2 days. The decision came 7 days later, delivered by email to all parties, 9 pages long, with findings of fact, conclusions, and disciplinary recommendations. Officer Gage Pruitt, suspended without pay for 60 days, removed from patrol duty. Mandatory bias training, 80 hours, 24-month probationary period. Transferred to a different precinct upon reinstatement. Not terminated. The union had argued first major infraction on record, a characterization that was technically accurate only because the 4 prior complaints had been erased from Pruitt's file by Captain Lanier's intervention. Officer Tess Whitmore, written reprimand. Separate investigation opened regarding body cam tampering and evidence deletion. Status, pending. Sergeant Nolan Calder, written reprimand for failure to de-escalate. No further disciplinary action. The panel noted that Calder had ultimately contacted dispatch and ordered Pruitt to release Marcus, actions that, while inexcusably delayed, demonstrated eventual compliance with procedural requirements. Captain Dwight Lanier, placed on administrative leave pending a separate IA investigation into complaint suppression and supervisory misconduct. Pay continued during the investigation. Timeline? Indefinite. Maya read the decision in her office. She read it twice. She set it down, picked up her pen, and wrote a single word on her legal pad in capital letters. Partial, not wrong, not insufficient. Partial. The word she used for outcomes that moved the needle without moving the system, for suspensions that would end, for training that would be forgotten, for investigations that would be extended until the public stopped paying attention, and for administrative leave that paid full salary while the accused sat at home waiting for the story to cool. The DOJ case, United States versus Fulton County Police Department, continued. Judge Rebecca Okafor had accepted reassignment and scheduled a pre-trial conference for 6 months out. The DOJ attorneys had added the Bellhaven incident to their pattern or practice evidence file, Exhibit 14, ring camera footage, live stream archive, dispatch logs, body cam audio, FOA documents, and the IA panel's findings. The case would take years. Discovery alone would take months. A consent decree, if the court imposed one, would require an 18-month federal monitor, annual compliance reports, and a reformed timeline that nobody involved expected to see completed before the next presidential administration. The system had absorbed the blow, the way systems do. This is where most stories end, with the hearing, the findings, the numbers. But this one doesn't end here, because the thing about systems is that they don't just absorb, they adapt. And what happened next proved that the people Marcus and Maya were fighting weren't gone. They were just quieter. 3 months after the hearing, October, the heat had broken in Atlanta, but the humidity lingered, the kind that clung to skin and clothing and memory. Pruitt was back on duty, desk assignment at a precinct 12 miles from Bellhaven, processing intake paperwork, filing reports, performing the administrative functions that the department reserved for officers too controversial to patrol and too protected to fire. His union had filed an appeal of the 60-day suspension, arguing that the punishment was disproportionate to a single incident. The appeal hearing was scheduled for January. Outcome? Uncertain. But the union's track record, 33 of 37 disciplinary appeals resolved in the officer's favor over the past decade, suggested that Pruitt's suspension might be reduced or overturned entirely by a board whose members were elected by the same officers they were supposed to discipline. The department had announced reforms, a word that appeared in the press release issued 3 days after the IA decision, and that meant, in practice, the following. Mandatory body cam activation during all civilian encounters, a policy that had already existed on paper and been violated without consequence. Quarterly bias training sessions, 2 hours each, conducted by a contractor selected from a pre-approved vendor list that hadn't been updated since 2013. And a community liaison initiative that consisted of a dedicated email address and a web form that routed complaints to the same internal affairs division that had classified 4 prior complaints as unfounded. Whether any of it would be enforced, whether the policies would change behavior or simply decorate it, was a question that the press release didn't address and that the department had no incentive to answer. Lanier remained on administrative leave. Full pay, $8,400 per month, deposited on the 1st and 15th into an account that continued to grow while the investigation into his conduct continued to stall. The IIA inquiry had been extended twice. The first time after the lead investigator was reassigned to another division, the second time after a scheduling conflict with key witnesses. A source inside the department told Maya off the record through a chain of intermediaries that preserved deniability. They're waiting for it to go away. They always wait for it to go away. And it usually does. Whitmore's separate investigation, Mohammed, the one into body cam tampering and evidence deletion, had produced no public findings. Her status, active duty, reassigned to administrative support. The evidence, the access logs showing her user ID on the deleted dashcam footage from Dr. Owens's complaint, was under review. The review had no deadline. The system hadn't broken. The system had done what systems do: absorbed, delayed, diluted. Released pressure through the valves of process and procedure until the temperature dropped to levels that institutions could tolerate. Marcus sat in his chambers on a Tuesday afternoon. Not the Fulton County case. Other cases, contract disputes, employment discrimination claims, habeas petitions. The daily work of a federal judge whose first 3 months on the bench had been defined by a case he had been forced to give away and a night he couldn't forget. The office was spare: bookshelves, constitutional law, federal procedure, criminal statutes, arranged the same way he'd arranged them at home. Desk clean, coffee mug in the same position it occupied every morning. The letter of commission hung on the wall behind his chair. Framed under glass, the presidential signature visible from across the room. He went home every evening at 6:15 p.m., drove north on Interstate 85, entered the Bellhaven gate code, turned onto Bellhaven Lane, parked in the driveway, and every evening before he opened the front door, he paused. 1 second, maybe 2. He looked at the smart lock, the one that had been updated, reset, and tested 14 times since the night of July 19th. He looked at the cameras, LEDs blinking red, always recording, always watching. He looked at the porch where he'd stood with his suitcase trying to get into his own house, before the flashlight hit his face and the night became something else. Then he entered the code. The lock opened. He stepped inside. The pause was never longer than 2 seconds, but it was always there. Maya's civil suit, filed under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, Marcus Ellery versus Gage Pruitt, Nolan Calder, Tess Whitmore, and Fulton County Police Department, was working its way through the federal court system. Not Marcus's court, a different judge, a different district even, to avoid any appearance of conflict. The defendant's attorneys had filed a motion to dismiss, citing qualified immunity for the individual officers. Maya's response was 47 pages long. The core argument occupied 2 sentences: the right to be free from arrest without probable cause while standing on one's own property is not a novel legal concept. It is, and has been, clearly established under the Fourth Amendment for the entirety of American constitutional history. The motion to dismiss was pending. The judge hadn't ruled. Settlement discussions had been initiated by the city attorney's office, not because they believed they would lose, but because they knew the live stream footage made a jury trial unpredictable and a verdict potentially expensive. Maya worked the case from her office at the Southern Legal Defense Fund. Evenings, weekends, between other cases, because she had other clients, other fights, other departments in other counties where the same patterns played out with different names and different addresses, but the same essential story. On her laptop, in a folder she'd created 3 days after the IA hearing, was a directory labeled Bellhaven Protocol. Inside, one text file. The text file contained 4 lines. Who sent the text? What is the Bellhaven Protocol? Why now? Follow the redacted pages. The text had arrived during the hearing, a message from an unregistered number to Maya's phone received at 11:47 a.m. while she was presenting evidence to the panel. She hadn't seen it until the hearing recessed for lunch. The message read, "Good work, counselor, but Lanier's not the ceiling. Ask about Bellhaven Protocol." By the time she'd tried to respond, the number was deactivated. By the time she'd asked a colleague in digital forensics to trace it, the SIM had been destroyed. The message existed only as a screenshot on Maya's phone and a mystery in her file. Bellhaven Protocol appeared in one other place. Page 287 of the FOIA documents. The page was almost entirely redacted, thick black marker covering every word except the subject line of an email header. Bellhaven Protocol, updated. No sender visible. No recipient, no date, no body text, just those 4 words. Bellhaven Protocol, updated, floating in a sea of black ink like a signal fire burning through fog. Maya had filed an appeal to unredact the page. The department had denied it, citing ongoing investigation and personnel privacy. She'd filed a second appeal, denied again. She was preparing a third, this one through federal court, under the theory that the redaction was overbroad and that Bellhaven Protocol was not a term that appeared in any published department policy, training manual, or operational guideline, which meant it was either a classified internal program or something that the department didn't want the public to know existed. Either way, it was a thread, and Maya pulled threads. Anna Prescott's letter arrived in Marcus's mailbox on a Saturday in mid-October. Not mailed, hand-delivered. No stamp, no return address. Just a cream-colored envelope with Mr. Ellery written on the front in a handwriting that slanted to the right and trembled at the descenders. Marcus found it when he checked the mail after mowing the lawn. He carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter next to his coffee, and opened it with a butter knife. 2 pages. Handwritten. Blue ink. The penmanship of a woman who had been taught cursive in a public school in the 1960s and had never abandoned it. The letter began, "Dear Mr. Ellery, I have written this letter 4 times. The first 3 versions were full of excuses. This one, I hope, is not." Anna wrote about 31 years in Bellhaven, about Gerald, his laugh, his habit of waving to every car that passed, his insistence that a neighborhood was only as strong as its willingness to know each other's names. About the years after Gerald died, when the house became quieter and the world outside it became louder, and the distance between the two, between the silent rooms where she lived and the changing streets where she didn't, grew until it became a wall. She wrote about the night, about the phone in her hand and the 11 seconds before she dialed, about the word strange and what it meant and what it didn't mean and what she had meant by it, which was something she was only now able to name. "I did not call because you were unfamiliar. I called because you were a black man I didn't recognize in a neighborhood where I had learned to treat that as a threat. I learned it from decades of living in a place that told me in 1,000 quiet ways that safety looked a certain way and that anything outside that appearance was suspicious. That is not an excuse. It is an explanation I owe you. I cannot undo what happened. I cannot give you back those 34 minutes. I cannot erase the marks on your wrists or the stain on your jacket or the image of you kneeling on your own lawn while I watched from behind a curtain. But I can tell you this, I am trying to change. I don't know if I will succeed. 68 years of habits do not dissolve because of one night of shame. But I am trying, and I wanted you to know that. With respect I should have shown sooner, Anna Prescott, Marcus read the letter twice. He sat at the kitchen counter where he'd sat with Maya 3 months ago, looking at the letter of commission, and read the words of a woman who had dialed 3 numbers and changed the trajectory of his first month as a federal judge. The handwriting, careful, deliberate, with the occasional tremor that betrayed the effort behind each word, reminded him of his grandmother's letters. She'd written to him every month during law school. Actual letters, on actual paper, in actual ink, because she'd believed that words committed to paper carried more weight than words typed on screens. She died during his 3rd year, 6 months before graduation, and the last letter she'd sent him said, "The law is a house, Marcus. Make sure everyone fits inside it, even the people who don't think they belong." Anna Prescott was not his grandmother. She was a stranger who had called 911 on him based on assumptions she was only now learning to name. But the letter in his hand, written on paper, in ink, with the visible effort of someone trying to say something true for the first time, carried a weight that he recognized. He folded it along the original creases, placed it back in the envelope, and put it in his desk drawer, the same drawer that held the HOA welcome packet with its red highlighted vehicle registration section, the windshield wiper note from day 5, and the growing file of documents that chronicled his first 3 months in a neighborhood that had welcomed him with casserole and suspicion in equal measure. He didn't reply. Not because he hadn't forgiven her. That was a question he hadn't answered for himself yet, and might not answer for months, and might not answer in a way that fit neatly into the categories of forgiveness and unforgiveness that people expected. He didn't reply because the letter didn't ask for a reply. It asked to be heard, and he had heard it. That was enough. For now, but 2 days later, on a Monday morning, Marcus was leaving for work when he saw Anna Prescott checking her mailbox across the street. She saw him. He saw her see him. The distance between them was 63 feet, the same distance that had separated her window from his porch on the night of July 19th. Marcus paused at his car door. Anna paused at her mailbox. Neither spoke. Then Marcus nodded. Small, almost imperceptible. The kind of nod that exists somewhere between acknowledgement and absolution. Not forgiveness exactly, but the recognition that the woman across the street was trying, and that trying, in a world where most people didn't, was worth at least a nod. Anna nodded back. Then she went inside. Marcus got in his car, 63 feet of asphalt between them, a little narrower than before. The body cam footage gap was never explained. 14 minutes, from 0038 to 0052, erased from the audio buffer by a method that required maintenance-level access to the Axon Body 3 system. Pruitt didn't have that access. Whitmore denied touching the device. Calder said he'd left the scene before 0038. IT specialist Hernandez's forensic report was clear. The deletion was manual, intentional, and performed using credentials that were not assigned to any of the 3 officers present at 412 Bellhaven Lane. The credentials belonged to a maintenance account, a system-level login used for firmware updates and diagnostic checks, that was shared among 6 departmental personnel, 3 of whom had administrative access to evidence servers. None of the 6 claimed responsibility. The department's IT security logs, which should have recorded the exact time, terminal, and IP address of the deletion, showed a gap of their own, a 12-minute period during which the logging system had been temporarily offline for maintenance. The maintenance had not been scheduled. No ticket had been filed. No technician had been assigned. Someone had turned off the surveillance of the surveillance, and they had done it during the active window when the 14 minutes were being erased. Maya added the finding to her Bellhaven Protocol file. The file was growing slowly in the way that institutional investigations grow, through FOA requests and source interviews and the patient accumulation of details that individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything. She didn't know what the Bellhaven Protocol was. She didn't know who had sent the text. She didn't know what the redacted pages contained or who had authorized their redaction or why the department's legal team had denied 2 appeals to unredact them with a speed that suggested the denials had been prepared before the appeals were filed. But she knew this. The system that had put Marcus on the ground was larger than Pruitt, larger than Calder, larger than Whitmore, larger than Lanier. It had rooms she hadn't entered and doors she hadn't opened, and a ceiling that the anonymous text had warned her about. Lanier's not the ceiling. That meant there were floors above the ones she could see. She pulled threads. It was what she did. The last week of October, a Thursday evening, Marcus came home at 6:18 p.m. Later than usual, a sentencing hearing had run long, and the drive from the courthouse had been slowed by construction on I-85 that seemed to have been happening since before he was born and would continue happening after he was gone. He parked in the driveway, walked to the front door, paused, 1 second, maybe 2, and entered the code. The smart lock opened. He stepped inside, set his briefcase on the counter, loosened his tie, poured a glass of water. His phone buzzed. Email notification. He glanced at the screen. The sender was an address he didn't recognize. Not a government domain, not the court system, not the police department, not any of the institutional addresses that populated his inbox during working hours. A personal Gmail account. The username was a string of numbers that meant nothing. Subject line, they know you recused. They're not worried anymore. No body text, no signature, no attachment, just the subject line. 11 words that sat on his phone screen like a handwritten note slipped under a door. Marcus set the phone on the counter. He looked at it the way you look at something that has just changed the shape of the room you're standing in. Not with fear exactly, but with the recognition that the room has a dimension you hadn't measured. He picked up the phone, read the subject line again. They know you recused. They're not worried anymore. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, through the window above the sink, the last light of an October evening fell across Bellhaven Lane. The water oaks turning gold, the lawns still green, the houses lit from within by the warm glow of lives being lived behind curtains and closed doors. At 416 across the street, Anna Prescott's kitchen light was on. She was making dinner for one, the way she'd made dinner for one every night since Gerald died. And she was thinking, as she thought every evening now, when the light changed and the street grew quiet, about the man across the street and whether he had read her letter and whether the trying she'd promised was enough, or if it was just another word for wanting to be forgiven without having earned it. At the Fulton County Police Department, in an office on the third floor, Captain Dwight Lanier sat at a desk he wasn't supposed to be using very much. Administrative leave meant no access to department facilities, but his key card hadn't been deactivated, which was either an oversight or an invitation, and read an email on a department computer. The email was short. The sender was redacted in Lanier's copy, an internal routing system that stripped identifying information from messages classified above a certain clearance level. The subject line read, Bellhaven Protocol, status update. The body of the email contained 3 lines. 3 lines that Lanier read, absorbed, and deleted, not to a trash folder, but with a secure erase protocol that overwrote the data 7 times before releasing the disk space. He logged out, left the building, drove home. The email was gone, but the protocol, whatever it was, whoever maintained it, whatever it protected, continued. At 412 Bellhaven Lane, Marcus stood in his kitchen, phone in hand, 11 words on the screen. The cameras blinked their red LEDs. 4 sentinels at 4 corners, recording everything and explaining nothing. He set the phone down. He drank his water. He went upstairs, changed out of his suit, and came back to the kitchen to make dinner. But before he started cooking, he did something he hadn't done before. He walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped onto the porch. The October air was cool. The first real cool of autumn, carrying the smell of burning leaves and the distant sound of a dog barking 3 streets over. The cameras blinked their red LEDs at each corner. The street was quiet. Anna Prescott's kitchen light glowed across the distance. Marcus looked at the lawn. In July, it had been the stage for the worst night of his life. Now it was just grass. Mowed, edged, ordinary. The magnolia tree where his suitcase had landed was dropping its first brown leaves. The walkway where his suit jacket had been stepped on was clean. The marks were gone. The evidence remained. He went back inside, locked the door, set the alarm. Started cooking. The smart lock was set. The cameras were on. The system was watching. But the question, the one the email had planted, the one that would grow roots in the coming weeks and months, the one that Maya would add to her file and that Marcus would carry in the space behind his professional composure, was not whether the system was watching him. It was whether the system was watching over him or watching to see what he'd do next. And somewhere in an office or a car or a house that Maya hadn't found yet and Marcus couldn't name, someone was reading about a federal judge who had recused himself from a case that could have held an entire police department accountable, and that someone was not worried anymore. They had said so, in 11 words, sent from a Gmail address that would be deleted by morning. The porch light stayed on, the LEDs blinked red, and the night settled over Bellhaven Lane, the way nights always settle over neighborhoods where everything looks perfect from the outside and something always is moving underneath. The Fulton County Police Department's pattern or practice case remains under federal oversight. Judge Okafor has set the trial date for the following spring. The consent decree negotiations are ongoing. Vance's civil suit on behalf of Marcus Ellery is pending in federal court. The qualified immunity motion has not been ruled on. Settlement discussions continue. Captain Dwight Lanier's administrative leave was extended a third time in November. No findings have been published. The 112 redacted pages of the FOI response have not been released. The 14 minutes of deleted body cam audio have not been recovered. The Bellhaven Protocol has not been identified, explained, or acknowledged by any official source. Anna Prescott still lives at 416 Bellhaven Lane. She has not called 911 since July 19th. Marcus Ellery still pauses at his front door every evening, 1 second, maybe 2, before entering the code. The cameras are still recording.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.